now. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to the July 20th special meeting of the Croton-Harmon Board of Education. I apologize that my video is not on right now. I'm having some bandwidth issues at home, so I shut my video off. But I would like to call the meeting to order and start off with the recommended action that the Board of Education approves the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. All right, now we'll move into new business. Recommended action that the Board of Education approves the 2020-2021 food service contract extension with Aramark as presented.
So moved.
Second.
On the question?
Do we want to go ahead? Beth's not on, I believe, but there were some questions that I think she wanted asked during the meeting.
I can certainly address them.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Jenny.
Okay. So there was a question as to whether or not there was a.
Actually,
Andrea?
I'm sorry to interrupt. Beth just sent an email saying that she's locked out of the meeting through her Chusta account. Can we send the link to her home email? She said her Chusta account has been locked out. Maybe she did the wrong email a couple of times. Can we send her? Tracy, can you do that?
Tracy's on mute.
Oh yeah, Tracy, I can't hear you.
Sorry. I'm sharing my screen. I cannot get on.
Okay.
Okay, I'll do it.
I'll send it to her.
Okay, great. Yeah, and maybe we can.
All right, Denise, you can go on now.
Okay, so the question was there a year-to-year increase on our a la carte items? And we were fortunate in that Aramark agreed to our contract extension. We were allowed for they were allowed a 1.3% CPI increase, and they did not take that. So we have a flat increase from year to year, and no change to our meal conversion factor or our a la carte. There was another question as to what percentage of our meals are a la carte, and it's approximately 25% of our meals are a la carte. The other important thing that I wanted to note is that with this contract extension and in light of the new guidelines and our production space at PVC and some other distribution protocols, it is highly unlikely that we will be able to provide a la carte options to our students just because of the time constraints and protocols surrounding the new meal plan. The next question was, is there a reason why we don't contract for summer meals? And currently we do not have the authorization to provide summer meals, but all of our families have been provided with other alternative options and contacts throughout the community for free meal service. This is also available on our website. And then the last question was, is there an opportunity to have pre-packaged meals and dishware so that children are don't have to deal with meal production and distribution? And yes, that is the expectation, that all meals will be provided pre-packaged in disposable containers for safety reasons.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. And Beth, I see you have joined us. Welcome.
Thank you. Sorry, technology.
Yeah. Listen, we understand. As I said earlier, my video is off because I'm having some bandwidth issues. So trust me, we understand.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So now we will move into
I think
3 point.
we need to vote,
I'm
right?
sorry. Right.
Or whatever it
We
is.
do need to vote. Thank you, Brian. Yes, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? Abstain? Motion carries. Thank you very much. All right, so now we will move into what the main crux of tonight's meeting is about, which is our superintendent report. So I will turn it over to Dr. O'Connell.
Did we freeze? I'm not hearing anything.
I
Now.
hear you
Oh,
now.
we
I
can
thought
hear you
I
now.
thought maybe you were having problems with your.
No, I
system.
just, no.
Good now.
We're good? Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Well, thank you and good evening and welcome to our board and any community members who are watching this evening. Tracy, are you sharing your screen with John Griffiths?
I'm going to unshare so he can get his on.
Great. So tonight for our discussion, we will focus on the work and the thinking of the task force. Nice, I believe, a combination of our survey feedback in terms of the work of the reentry task force and our school reentry plans. Before we get started, I just would like to say a copy of what we're presenting tonight will be on our webpage. So now if you notice when you go to our webpage, you'll just be hit with the school reentry site. So we're keeping all of our information there, and we'll continue to add to this. So again, the purpose of our time together tonight is to really continue to communicate the work of our school reentry task force. So if you would, John, next slide. Okay, thank you. So looking at this slide, and again, some of us are keeping up to date with the minute. Anytime we hear something, we're aware, but others might not be tuning in all of the time. So this past Monday on the 13th, we received an update from Governor Cuomo. And along with that came the New York State Department of Health guidance memo. Critical document that we'll be referencing this evening. In his address, Governor Cuomo did say that he would be using data to drive the decision on the reopening of schools. And that decision he anticipates being the first week in August. So until then, we would await to hear what that decision would be. But when he further detailed what he meant by data will drive the decision, he shared two pieces. That the daily infection rate in a 14-day average is 5% or lower, and we remain in phase 4, then he would most likely say schools are open. And the other side, daily infection rate in a 7-day average is 9% or higher, and we exit perhaps phase 4, schools would be closed. So we are looking towards the first week of August to see what the governor's decision will be. However, that hasn't stopped us. We have continued conversations, we've continued planning, et cetera. So I just want to be clear that just because we're waiting for the first week of August to hear doesn't mean the work of the task force has stopped. As a matter of fact, the task force has another meeting tomorrow afternoon. So if we could go to the next slide. Again, these first few slides are just setting the context of our discussion for this evening. As we've spoken, our school reentry task force has many key focus areas, and you can see here by the puzzle pieces, physical plans, student and staff protocols, assessment of learning plan, et cetera. And they're all pieces of a puzzle because they all fit together to help us form our school reentry plan, which I'll talk a little bit more shortly. So they all fit together to help us with our plan creation. The conversations that are ongoing in each of the key focus areas become, in one way, shape, or form, a part of our plan. I'd like to look at that middle piece there, that middle puzzle piece, the assessment of learning plan. This directly linked to our surveys. You saw 2 surveys that went out. Survey 1 was directly on e-learning and the experiences from March through June. And we asked for targeted feedback from that experience. We asked it of parents and guardians. We asked it of students, and we asked it of faculty. I do encourage you to go to our website so that you can see the survey data. Now, what's really important is we learned a lot from our survey data. We learned a lot from those 3 voices, as I said, parents, students, faculty, and took a close look at what we did. And then how can we use that information and what we gleaned from that information as learning moving forward. So we might not always pause and say we learned this from our survey data, but I think when you look through the survey data, you will see evidence of the thinking within our planning discussions. So, like, for example, learned a lot about what worked well in certain scenarios, live, which is called synchronous, or not live, asynchronous. We learned a lot. And again, I encourage you to go to our website to see the survey data for yourself. The 3rd survey, which was a regional survey, we are just receiving those results by Friday. So we'll be able to share a regional perspective as well. And once we have those data, we will put that as well on our website. So next slide, please. So did we skip over a slide, John? Can we go back one? John, I'm missing the health and safety slide.
Isn't that the slide?
No, the big one that you have the health and safety puzzle piece in the center.
Oh my, yeah, it's a bit of a mystery. If you give me a second, I could pull it up from another presentation.
The mysterious puzzle piece disappeared.
Yeah, I apologize. I don't know what happened to the slide.
That's okay. Kind of funny because my leading statement is going to say how paramount it is. So, okay, thank you, John, for bringing that up because I really like this visual. We've had so many conversations about planning and schedules, etc., but we never want to lose sight of this particular visual because health and safety of our students and staff permeates any of the conversations we've had, and that's really important. What the conversations of the task force and administrative team and teachers, et cetera. We're looking very closely at the CDC guidelines, the Department of Health guidelines, the New York State Education Department guidance document that came out on July 16th. All of those pieces. It's such an important slide because I never want anybody listening, when we start talking about scheduling scenarios, the reasons and the basis and foundation of the decision-making or thinking has health and safety. So we might be saying we're inclined to move in this direction because there's a health and safety piece to it. Our plans will then drill down and be very specific, which I'll get to in the next slide. But I want you to show that I want to indicate that health and safety is always the first and foremost foundation of our discussions with whatever that discussion is. So if you would now, I don't know, John, how you go back to the other presentation to bring us to the next slide. Perfect. There you are. Okay. So looking at this slide, I want to highlight a few things. Although we won't be drilling down this evening, because tonight we really wanted to give people a glimpse of what that school reentry might look like. I'll be sharing a timeline shortly on some of our thinking on how we want to roll out some of these discussions. But though we tonight won't be drilling down to each piece here, I want to be clear that each of those headings there, social distancing and face coverings, gatherings and operational activities, hygiene, cleaning and disinfection, communication, screening and tracking. Each of those headings, we're examining the Department of Health guidance very clearly. So for example, under each one of those areas, there's some mandatory pieces where I'll give you one example for social distancing and face covering. Department of Health says, ensure that social distancing of at least 6 feet or physical barrier is maintained between individuals while in school facilities and on school grounds. Each one of those areas has specific guidance, and our plans that we will be submitting, and the public, our Croton-Harmon public will be able to see, will be specific protocols and procedures. Tonight, we won't be able to go through each of the protocols and procedures associated with each of those headings. But I want you to know that when we get to the plan discussions, the specifics, you will see this. So for example, I get a lot of questions about what does contact tracing look like for Croton-Harmon. The guidance is very clear, and I want to read one piece to you. We, the district, would notify the state and local health department immediately upon being informed of any positive COVID-19 diagnostic test by an individual within the school facilities, on school grounds, including students, faculty, etc. It's very specific, and our nursing team is developing protocols surrounding each one. So for example, protocols for just that. When and if we are informed of a positive case, what are the steps involved? What are the protocols and procedures in place for the isolation room that we have a student in to separate, or whomever, to separate from the general population? What are our protocols and procedures for screening? What are our protocols and procedures for hygiene and hand washing, etc.? What I want you and the public to know is our plan will have detailed protocols and procedures for each of those areas that will be part of the document that we file with the state. So although tonight we won't have time to go through all of those procedures and protocols, I wanted you and the public to know that our plan will have those specific pieces. And in the timeline, I'm going to share when we might have some of those conversations with you as well as the public. So if we could go to our next slide, John, which is the timeline. And this is a very colorful slide, which is, first thing I want to say is the dates could be subject to change. So I want to be clear on that. Although we are, trying to outline to give folks a little bit of an idea of our thinking and when we'll be having conversations. But note that we could need to change and adjust. So if we take a look at this, let's start with around 7/13, where we see we've received guidance from New York State, the Department of Health, and we started to review that in relationship to the work we've had ongoing with the task force. The 16th, we have the New York State Education Department shared their guidance with us. looking at some of these other pieces. Tonight is 7:20. We're having a reentry plan discussion with you, the board, and hope that our community is watching as well, so they can keep abreast of the discussions we're having. The board, and I put little asterisks on a few dates. The board has said they'd like to continue to meet over time so that we can continue these conversations. So I believe we have agreed to have another meeting on the 27th, which is a week from today. And then if you take a look at some other dates on there, 8/11, I put a little asterisk next to Board of Ed meets, 8/24 asterisk Board of Ed meets. Though that's up to you. Those are just dates that perhaps we'd like to look at, because you already have scheduled a Board of Education meeting on the 6th of August, as well as the 20th. So we thought maybe we might want to embed a few more board meetings, but that's up to you what dates you'd like those to land on. That's why I have an asterisk in those boxes. What I'd like you to see now, though, is 7/31, July 31st. That's a big day because that is the date that we have to file our plan with the State Education Department. Simultaneously, we'll put the plan on the website. Now, the plan, just to note, the state is asking for assurances that these are the parts that we have in our plan, and we can still edit and edit our plan as our thinking continues, because as you can see here, 7/31 is pretty early yet. Because the governor still didn't make a decision on opening school, and conversations continue as we get more information and clarity on some of the guidance documents that have been put out. So that's a big day because our plans will be on the website for the public to see, and we're filing it with New York State. Now, if you take a look at 8/4, 8/10, 8/12, and 8/17. Those are what we're calling community forums. What we'd like to do, the plan has many, many, many parts. Even if you went back 2 slides and saw each and every one of those boxes, the plan has a lot of parts to it. So what we'd like to do is, and going to have conversation with the task force tomorrow, is chunk it. So, looking at, what maybe one community forum will be dedicated to the health and safety protocols, such as what the nurses are working on, what the buildings and grounds, facilities, cleaning, and those protocols. That's what I mean by chunking. And maybe another community forum would be more on the learning plan, special education, ELL, et cetera. So that's what I mean by chunking the community forums to make it digestible, because going through the whole plan can be quite exhausting. So we're thinking of chunking those community forums so that they're manageable pieces, and we can have good targeted dialogue. If you take a look at more towards the left of what I'm looking at, the more towards the slide, where it says principals, coffees. We also like to build in smaller meetings where parents, community can hear directly from their principals and the thinking specific to schools versus a district view of things. And then if you take a look all the way towards, as I'm looking at the screen, my left, where you see conference days and schools open. And you notice there are asterisks there. I'm still like to have conversation with the task force, with the board, on looking at the possibility of front loading some superintendent conference days. So we already have 2 scheduled in August. What some of my area superintendents are talking about is perhaps having some conversation about taking other superintendent conference days that were later scheduled later in the year, bringing them forward, and having more superintendent conference days at the beginning of the year to help with making sure everybody is on board with all of the procedures and protocols and et cetera. So there's a lot of procedural following of the protocols in a great many areas. So some of the area districts have been having, we as SUPs have been having superintendents conversations about maybe front loading those. I'd like to have more task force feedback on that and Board of Ed discussion, because if there's a calendar change, of course, that would require action. There's also something I want to talk about with the task force a little bit more deeply, as well as the board in that area, is just looking at it from perhaps gradually phasing and have more conversations there. Haven't landed anywhere there. I do believe as a task force, we need to have a little bit more discussion and as well as the board in that area. So I'm going to take a breath there because we're going to be moving into scheduling scenarios. But do you have any questions on what I've shared thus far, which are more introductory of leading to where we're going?
Dr. O'Connell, I just have one question. Where in this timeline, and I know the state hasn't been terribly clear about this, but when are they advising that they're going to give you feedback? The state is going to give us feedback about the plan.
So
first week in August, a little later?
So I want to find the direct language. And let me see if I can do it quickly, Beth.
Okay.
But they said it's going to be a little different than it was with the continuity of learning plan. Let me just see if I can find it quickly. If not, I'll get back to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
The statement that was made, and John, you might be able to look in the document faster than I, but I did read in the New York State guidance that it was to be assumed to be approved.
Okay.
So a little bit different than last time. Last time we waited to hear, and I just wanted to try to find that exact language for you, but I'll get that to you. But last time we submitted the continuity of learning plan, the meals plan, a new child nutrition plan, I should call it by its name, and the third plan, which was something for the essential daycare for the essential workers. So we had to submit 3 separate plans last time,
right,
which were more narrative,
right,
and they then approved them. This time, I believe the guidance says you're going to assume that they're approved and keep moving forward unless you hear otherwise. But it sounded like just make sure your assurances are in place, that you have something in your plan about X and Y and Z. And it's pretty voluminous, all of the insurances, but I'll get you that exact language so that I cite it correctly.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that topic. I'd still want to try to press SED to tell us by when will you tell us if there's a problem with our plan.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if we could just assume it's true, but then they could come back, say on 8/24 and say, oh no, you've got this, you got to change this all around. And that's sort of my nightmare, right?
Right.
What if
I hear you.
What if they, and I think we should be, and maybe this is an advocacy thing, but we really should be pushing them to say, okay, we're not going to be giving any more feedback on the plans. We're done telling people there's problems with their plans, or they need to give us some kind of thumbs up. I mean, assume it's good. I worry about that.
Right. I hear you. So let me try to find that exact language and share that with you. And let me just say, we'll check one more spot out of the 140-page document they gave us. Okay, here it is. I did find it. It's on page 14, just so you have a reference point as well on the New York State Education document guidance. It says here, please note that unlike the previous processes used to collect continuity of learning, child care, and child nutrition plans, the information submitted through the portal will not include detailed narratives or descriptions of specific actions to be taken by school or district as part of their reopening plan. Instead, those details must be articulated in the materials that are publicly posted on your website. This approach will allow schools to develop plans in their preferred format to rapidly address changes that might be needed based on local needs and to update their materials, their plan materials on a regular basis throughout the school. Once LEAs, which is us, which districts, have completed and submitted their survey within the portal, a confirmation notice indicating that the completed survey has been received by New York State Ed will be generated and sent to the superintendent. Plans should be implemented with fidelity upon submission and should be considered as approved unless the LEA, which is us, is notified that modifications are necessary to ensure compliance with this guidance. So that's the language there. And again, they don't give you any specific dates, but that's the language. Consider them approved unless you hear from us, but they don't, to your point, Beth and Josh, they don't say specifically a date. Okay, any other questions before we move on?
Yeah, I have a question.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Brian had a question. I think he's been waiting.
Yeah. Are we once the state, let's assume that they say, hey, go ahead and start on September 2nd. Are we obligated to do that in some way? Because it's completely feasible, and it's a huge concern of a lot of people that despite being allowed to open, it's really not that safe. So I'm curious about that.
So Ryan, I think we're going to see there is latitude, and I preface that with the districts are to file certain plans, an in-person plan, a hybrid plan, and a remote plan, as we're going to be talking about some of those this evening. Now, is it up to the district on the fluidity on how we move through those plans? So let's say the governor says schools are open. There appears to be some leeway with the direction we go in. And that's why before, Brian, I love this question. When looking at the timeline where it says the conference days and schools open on 9/2, this is what I meant by I want to have more discussion on what that is and looks like for Croton Harmon. And do we want to, may we need to consider, to your point, maybe a phasing of something? We talked to the governor and all of our plans have talked about phasing, but yet with school opening, we didn't talk about phasing. So is that part? I want to be clear that we need to, as a task force and as a board, have more discussion in that area where, to the far left, where it says conference days and school open. And that's one of the discussions I'm having tomorrow with the task force to get some feedback there. But yes, more discussion needs to occur there. And is that, and I'm sure that discussion will be shaped on where we are as a region with health.
Debbie, if I could just follow up on Brian's question, so the way you're saying that in terms of more discussion with the board and with the task force, is that to mean that that ultimate decision lays with the school district, or does it still lay with the state?
We are looking at getting more clarity on that. John, you can chime in. That is one of the regional discussions we're having on the decision on that. Like, for example, when, let's say we have one of our plans, which you'll hear tonight, is a fully remote plan. Is it the district that can decide, let's start with one plan scheduling scenario versus another? We're looking for clarity, and that's why I said we need more discussion of the conference days and school reopening and what that could look like. So I want to be very careful. It might be something the governor says. It might be the clarity we're asking for from the state on some of those pieces in our question and answer periods with the state.
Thank
So
you.
again, just maybe a further follow-up. I get, not to be too obtuse, but what if the board just said, no, we do not want to open? Like, what actually happens? I don't exactly know.
Well, we have a very clearly in the guidance, it speaks about a 180-day requirement. That didn't change in the guidance that came out of the state ed department. So we would have a mandate of 180, but to your point, Brian, how does that have to be done? Do we have to have in person? Can we as a district say, you know what? We want to start with a fully remote plan. We want to start with phasing in from fully remote to maybe a hybrid. I believe, but I want to be very cautious because the guidance just came out on Thursday, that we are interpreting it correctly. Very important. We would not interpret it correctly and think we have something within our control that we may not. So I want to be very cautious with my response there.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't actually mean not open. I meant open remotely.
Correct.
So that, yeah.
I thought that's what you meant.
Yeah.
But yes, so that's why I'm so intrigued with the 831-9192 and get more clarity on that, because we might feel that we need to look at this in a different way in terms of phasing.
I have another question about, as it's kind of a follow-up question regarding schedule. We have a lot of things to get in place that may determine our schedule too. I mean, I've seen some of the materials we need. Is there, again, is it possible? I know we do want to start on the 2nd, that's the, the drop dead date, or, depending upon what's going on, can we look at that? It's another issue. I mean, the state's not telling us that we absolutely have to open on a particular date. That's left up to the district, right?
So the board sets the calendar, right?
Right.
And you did that in, was it February? Before all of this, right?
Yes.
So you adopted, I should say, the calendar for the 2021 school year.
Right.
This is what I meant, Andrea, and again, thank you for the question, but this is what I meant by, we might want to front load some of those superintendent conference days. So we have one in November and we have one in March. So what if, again, I want to have more discussion on this. What if our conference days were 8/31, 9/1, 9/2, 9/3, right? You taking 2 more superintendent conference day, front loading them to the beginning of the year, so that staff have a good amount of time, if you will, to be in the building, physically present, to see, all of the procedures and protocols that we have in place prior to the arrival of students. Then maybe, to Brian's point and Beth's point, I think you made this too, Beth, that maybe we then look at, well, given the health scenario at the present moment and how we're feeling, maybe we want to then move to the remote plan for a phasing in of some time. Then maybe we look at, so I think we definitely have the latitude with your calendar, and that would take board action on changing the calendar. And then we definitely would want to make sure we had greater clarity that we have as a local education agency, that's what LEA means, as a local education agency, that we have the ability to make those decisions that are best in our best interest. And where we are as a district with our comfort, with our thinking, with our et cetera. So that's why I really do think, and put those asterisks in there, that needs a lot more conversation before I feel like we've landed somewhere. And yes, Andrea, we will be talking about the schedules, our next step. And the board will see, and the community will see, they are quite involved. And, to your point, each one has a scenario within a scenario, if you will, that we would need to make sure we had procedures and protocols in place. Okay, we
Debbie?
ready to move on?
Debbie, I just have a quick question.
Oh, hi, Iris. I didn't see you. I'm sorry.
Hi. The first week of August, is that when the governor is going to announce whether he will be permitting schools to open? Is that
Yes.
I don't see it on the timeline, so I didn't know. Even though they're not approving the schools' plans, that's what that first week window is to say?
Yes. So the governor is supposed to be making that decision. It was on a previous slide. We could always put it on the timeline too. Let's remember this is just a draft. So we could put that in there. But yes, he says he's sharing the decision the first week in August. Okay. How we doing? Can I move on?
I think I'm going to beat a dead horse. So what I think I would like, and maybe you're going to get to it, but essentially like the disaster plan, because it seems actually entirely feasible. And I'll give you sort of a hypothetical. So I get COVID, I'm in the hospital. Now I've potentially infected somebody at CET and 2 people at PBC, and they've gone to all the classes with all their classmates. And I've gone to a couple of board meetings, and I've coached soccer on Saturday. So like the entire village is now quarantined. So is that in the plan, or is that something that's been considered?
So that comes under, you're not going to see that in a scheduling scenario, Brian, first, tonight. But when we were on the slide, which talked about the New York State Department of Education and Department of Health, there are the mandatory pieces. If anyone, is positive for COVID-19 that has anything to do with our school districts. So for example, if we find out one of our students or staff or faculty members is COVID positive, these first steps would be to contact the Department of Health. They then become our partners. And when we go through those protocols and procedures, you'll hear what our steps are, because a very important part of that would be the contact tracing piece. And the contact tracing piece is very specific, and we need to have our coordination and plans associated with the Department of Health. The Department of Health, it is my understanding from everything we've been discussing and planning, they become our partners. The Department of Health might say to us, we need to close a school, we need to close a room, we need to close, the district. They will be our partners in the contact tracing. They take the lead on that. They might ask us for our help in terms of, finding out who a child or staff member may have had contact with. Tonight, you'll hear us talk about the cohorts, how we want to keep a close eye on our cohorts. And that means a group of students that we want to try to keep together as much as possible within a day. That becomes a little easier with elementary and middle, but you'll hear John speak about the cohorts and how important that is. So we know who is in a group. So if the case is, we have a positive case and the Department of Health says to us, okay, help us know who that staff member or student may have had contact with, and that becomes part of the contact tracing protocols. You may have heard similar news recently after one of the graduations in the Westchester area, how they located the students, then the contact tracing began almost immediately to identify students or folks that may have been in contact. They then were told to quarantine. So that's part of the mitigation and the containment. So Brian, yes, that would be very much a part of our plan, what the protocol would be. And I'll tell you just broadly that it will and does involve the outreach to the Department of Health.
Okay.
Dr. O'Connell, just piggybacking on that for 1 second, because I think that was a very helpful answer and a very thorough one. And I'm just wondering also, and I know the Department of Health is right, the primary partner, but are we also, you know, like mayors of Croton, the town supervisor of Cortland, and you know, the Westchester County executives, is there, has the state given any guidance about like outreach, you know, because we have a whole other part of Croton, you know, the school is a big part of it, but we have all these other people in Croton that could be impacted by someone being sick at the school. So has the state said you need to have protocols to be able to talk to your mayor, or is that going to just fall back on the Department of Health to do that?
So also a wonderful question. Each week I meet with the area superintendents and we have a conversation with the county executive and his team. Okay. Today's conversation was specifically with the, if they could be giving us a little bit more in terms of their protocols, you know, in writing. And they're promising that to us so that when we're developing and writing our plans, we can include some of their verbiage, Beth, in our plan. And what we shared today, that's what I like so much about the question, is what we shared today was, and it wouldn't make sense for each district to have different language surrounding that, which is what when we talk about, I just talked a few minutes ago, all the things we learned about e-learning from March to June and how that's impacting our planning. Those are some of the big ahas on the connection with the Department of Health. You know, the guidance depended on who you spoke with. So we've shared that with George Latimer, who has been really just wonderful with us, trying to give us time to hear our concerns and what we need to develop our plans. But really good conversation with his team. So they heard that we really need to have those. So that's an important piece you bring. So who else do we need to communicate? Right. And how is that? And I know there's a lot of privacy rules. That's another piece that we've said to the Department of Health, you need to help us with that. So fingers crossed that they heard those pieces, that we really want to have some more specificity, not only how we help with the contact tracing. Who else do we need to be communicating? How do we communicate? What is it we're allowed to say? And if they could help us in that. So that's ongoing, Beth, but a good piece.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, those pieces, if I could just say one more thing, even though I said I was ready to go on, those pieces, I don't want the board or the community who's listening tonight. Those are critical pieces, those protocols and procedures. So I definitely want to have community forum time so people can really see what it is we're talking about, like when we're talking about procedures and protocols, et cetera, so they can gain a sense. That's not our focus for tonight because we're still developing everything for our plan and what's expected of us. But we're going to shift into schedules. But remember that puzzle piece that I took time to have John Griffiths find. No matter what we're talking about in terms of our schedule, that puzzle piece of health and safety is critical and the foundation of our thinking. So moving on, John, I think we're ready for the next slide. Scheduling scenarios. So I'll just introduce it, and then you've heard a lot from me. I'll switch it over to John. So it's not like Charlie Brown's teacher. Wah, wah, wah. So you get to hear a different voice. And we always say he has kind of a radio voice. So looking at scheduling scenarios is where we're going to take this discussion now. Through my discussion, though, with area superintendents, I just want to put it out there. Every district is landing in a different spot, although no one has landed as what their definitive plan is, because we're still, going through the guidance. But if you hear about other districts, you might hear they're looking at a totally split schedule, and split schedule will mean something in a few minutes. Total split schedule K through 12. You might hear a district plan in a neighboring district say, you know what? Our plan, we're focusing in on bringing all of our K-8 students back 100% of the time, and then a split schedule for 9 through 12. You might hear other district plans talk about bringing back K through 5 100% of the time, and then students in, another hybrid scenario 6 to 12. My point being is we are going to see some variability within when districts finally land on their plans. And the state ed, I should say, is giving us that latitude. And what I want the board and community to know is each and every district looks at it through the lens of space and looks at it through the lens of their human resources, their staffing. So we'll be talking about scenarios. We'll talk about it in terms of space and staffing, et cetera. But I really want you, eventually, when all plans are filed, we are going to see the variability, which goes back to one of our previous conversations. I think it was Neil that asked the question, then how does BOCES handle this with their career and technical education that all of our children feed into? Well, they're in these discussions with us. They're hearing where districts are considering and what they're still grappling with and where they might land. But that will be a piece that BOCES will have to then fill in and figure out when they finally get all of our district plans. So we do have students that avail themselves to our BOCES programs. So much still to be discussed when we see what BOCES does when they see all of the district plans. And the last thing I'll share before I turn it over to John is, again, I think when the board and the community sees the scheduling scenarios, and if you've had a chance to look at the survey data on the website, I think you will see, and we will certainly highlight on occasion, how that survey data, the things we gleaned and learned from our March through June experience are part of our planning. So we thank everybody for their feedback they gave us in all of our surveys moving forward. So John?
Great, thank you. So we'll go back to that puzzle piece. I think it's something that we cannot reiterate enough. When we're talking about schedule, we're talking about it from the physical, from the health and safety domain, really informing the decision-making that we have. And when we're looking at the realm of health and safety to inform scheduling, the most obvious things that comes to mind is the need for physical distancing and also maintaining cohorts within our buildings. In our scheduling models, we have, with regards to cohort groupings and physical distancing, devised a way to divide our student population into two halves. We are planning on doing this by grouping all of our students from K through 12 by the first letters of their last names. By applying this approach district-wide, we can assure families that all siblings follow the same schedule, hopefully creating the best possible situation for our families. So you will see this coding on all of our schedules. We have an orange schedule that is labeled Croton, that is representing a schedule that would apply to students with the last names of A through K. And you will also see on our scheduling a column header that is in black and labeled Harmon, and that represents the schedule that students in the district with the last names L through Z will be following. As we go through this evening, we're going to be looking at 4 different scheduling scenarios. I apologize in advance because there is a complexity to this information, and I will do my best to describe them in a slow and accurate way, provide time for any clarifying questions after each scenario is covered. We've been spending a long time. Obviously, you can imagine dealing with this situation has meant dealing with complexity and embracing complexity. Hearing for it for the first time, you'll have to let me know how it goes, because there's quite a lot. There's quite a lot to cover.
Okay, so it's really important that you focused in on John saying we're going to come up with, share, I should say, 4 scenarios. Scenario 1, and again, as John said, at the end, after he reviews this, we'll pause for questions for just that scenario. So if you can see here in scenario 1 is all grades K through 12 are on a split schedule. And that means 50% of the students would be in the building at a time. So now let's focus in on that, what that would look like from the lens of CET, PVC, and the high school.
So when we begin exploring how to best bring in 50% of the population on different days in a split schedule, we narrowed down a lot of our options that were out there that we explored as a task force to 2 different approaches. The top line, we call this an AB architecture. This was a architecture that was recommended by our instructional program focus area within our task force. As teachers and as we got feedback from parents, one of the really attractive things about this model was the alternating days for students that provide a desired consistency and learning. As we further reviewed and discussed, however, the task force began leaning towards the bottom approach. The AABB architecture is desirable from the standpoint of health and safety, as it keeps our cohorts together for 2 consecutive days. So once again, just to sort of restate the concept here, on the top line, we would have alphabet A through K coming in one day, then L through Z the next. When we're looking at the bottom row, we would see that cohort of students last name A through K coming in 2 subsequent days, then being at home for the next 2 days, while the Harmon schedule letters L through Z would be coming in. This slide depicts, we're going to look at the AABB architecture, how this might play out over time. The first row depicts AABB over a 3-week period. You'll see, if you're looking at the orange schedule, if we just go 2 days on, 2 days off, 2 days on, 2 days off, the orange schedule is on Monday and Tuesday, then Friday and Monday of the next week, then Thursday and Friday of the same week, then Wednesday and Thursday. What we start to see is that there is a lack of consistency in terms of scheduling. One of the things that we gleaned from our survey data was that parents said they would love to have a consistent weekly schedule. It's important for planning. It's important for childcare and organizing their work schedule. So that brings us down to the second line. That shows us one way to approach having weekly consistency. You'll see now our orange Croton schedule in both weeks is always coming into school on Mondays and Tuesdays. Our black Harmon schedules, L through Z's, are always meeting on Wednesdays and Thursdays. And now what you see on Fridays will alternate. Orange will come in one Friday, black will come in the next Friday. That is fully utilizing our building to the greatest extent. All you've got to do is basically keep track of what, what Friday is it? Is it when I'm coming in or staying home? So the next and last line is a further simplification of basically that row. Once again, the Croton Orange schedule, your A through Ks are always meeting on Mondays and Tuesdays. The Black Harmon schedule, letters L through Z, always meeting on Wednesdays and Thursdays. This time you'll see we introduced a third color. The green representing an e-learning day, which would be a day dedicated to everybody learning remotely at home. As we've been looking at the concept of a remote learning day, obviously it provides that consistency within the schedule. It also has been affording us some other things that we have been considering. But the question with the remote learning day is, if we were to use it, where is the best place to use it? One of the things that came out of our task force for the instructional programming group, have it on a Monday. Have it on a Monday creates a level of equity in that there are a lot of Monday holidays. So you don't have to worry about one particular group being off when there are a lot of holiday vacations times. Another thing attractive from the instructional point of view on a Monday, it would be a good day to launch learning. By launching learning, having the entire class being at home means they could be together. It could be a time where they could hear a teacher's lesson. It could be a time where as a group, everybody together, they could have a classroom discussion, have a real good understanding of the independent and cooperative work expectation the teacher's setting forth, and have a time to ask questions and have everybody in the class hear the answers. As we explored this concept with our task force at our last meeting, we engaged in a thought exchange, and it is actually leaning us towards a Wednesday. Because once again, with health and safety being a primary focus, Wednesday provides the opportunity for a deep cleaning of our facilities in between the two different cohorts. For that reason, as we present the different models, you're going to basically see this slide sort of brings us through where we have been as we have been iterating from basically having a remote learning day and then an ABAB, to a remote learning day, AABB, and where we are landing in the present tense, the third bottom line, having an AA day Monday, Tuesday, a remote learning day on Wednesday, and then the BB on Thursday and Friday. So one of the things that I'm sure we're asking is, what does each scenario look like? And what I mean by scenario, what does it look like when a child is at home? What does it look like when they are at school? We know at school there will be now only half the class. So if we had a class of 24 students, now there are 12 in school in a classroom at any one time. We know that they're physically distanced, and there are some guidelines as to how to set up our classrooms. Probably the more compelling question that we have right now is, what are students doing while they're at home? So this is something where we're very thankful to have had survey data. Especially relevant was when we looked at our student survey data. One of the questions we asked them from the springtime learning, what modalities of learning did they really like best? We had them report on 8 or 9 different modalities. This basically, the data that's displayed shows you the last 3 that we asked. And I have them displayed, but because the 2 on the right were the most favorable ratings that we had in regards to what students said was great in terms of online learning. And those 2 are talking about scheduled live instruction with the teacher. This was also affirmed by parent voices that we heard through survey data, anecdotally through conversations and emails as we were in touch with our community, that there was a desire to have live interaction. So therefore, as we look at the schedules and we're looking at what students are doing when they are at home in these split scheduling models, we're taking into consideration the fact that that was something that our students and our parents greatly desired. So now we're going to take a deep dive into specific building schedules to see how this plays out, and we'll start with CET. What you're going to notice is that there are 2 columns for every day of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Once again, Wednesday is labeled in green because it's an e-learning day when everybody in this model would be at home. But now let's take a look at Monday and gain a little bit of clarity about what we see going on here. When we look at Monday, we see the orange Croton schedule are in school. That's just an example of a typical school day where there is an ELA block, there's an academic block, and there's a math block. There is a time for special, there's a time for lunch. It looks different at different grade levels, so that is really meant to be a placeholder that indicates a normal school day. When we look at the Harmon schedule at home, we are seeing, first of all, that there is a remote learning teacher. So there is a member of the CET staff at every grade level that is designated to be online with different class sections at different times of the day. They are not meant to be online synchronously for all of the green blocks where it says ELA remote with teacher. What we are saying is we do not want students in front of a computer all day long, but during that block, there would be a scheduled time for each classroom of 12 kids to be online with their remote learning teacher for 30 minutes. This is something that, once again, we are really using feedback from our community to think about what's the best way for remote learning to look like. We have learned a lot of great tools. We have a lot of great lessons and experiences on how to use those tools. And what we're working on now is how do we leverage all of those experiences. Later on in the presentation, we'll talk about the professional learning that we are conducting over the summer. But it's really now, how do we use the time in the classroom, the time at home with small groups doing remote learning, our e-learning day, to structure learning where the students are active. They're engaging in relevant learning, where they are cooperative, whether they are in the classroom, at home, where they are breaking the isolation of only working independently and being asked to work with others in a collaborative fashion, so that we are creating experiences that are both engaging and joyful to students. It's not going to be a normal fall, but we are committed to doing everything we can in these schedules to say, you're going to be safe, you're going to be sound, you're going to learn, you're going to have fun. And that is hard to spell out in colored blocks, but I want to say it while we're looking at the first schedule, because it is a core belief we have going forward. Moving on to a split schedule model for the middle school. It's looking a lot more complex because 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade all have different schedules. But once again, let's just focus in on Monday. On Monday, we see once again that the Croton orange schedule is in school. You'll see for 5th and 6th grade in the top half of the schedule, you'll see that their schedule, basically blue is their classroom times. And then down below in the bottom part, we see 7th and 8th grade schedule. What I want to bring your attention to is what we're coding in these schedules when students are at home in green and yellow. The green representing times where a student is on their computer, basically now electronically going into their classroom with their classroom teacher. So this is live instruction. The classroom, so if we're looking at the period 2 ELA math period, the teacher is in the classroom with his or her students for about 20 minutes during that period. The people in the Black Harmon schedule are now going in virtually through a Google Meet or through Zoom so that they can video conference into that classroom. and now have synchronous instruction with the kids that are in the classroom. What are they doing that time? It really depends on where a teacher is in the learning. That could be a time where they're giving a lesson the way I'm talking to you right now. I could be talking to the kids that are in front of me and talking to the kids online. It might be a time where the kids that are at home in that schedule are having a conference. I'm in front of the classroom as a teacher. I'm saying to the kids that are in my classroom, okay, you know what to do. This is time to work independently. I'm going to be working with the kids online right now. Please don't interrupt me. And I'm going to the kids online and I'm saying, okay, so now you read that chapter. What are your questions? Oh, you did that writing. Let me see how you dealt with that prompt, and having that time of formative assessment. So we're not prescribing how it gets used, but it will be used on an ongoing basis all those times that you see marked in green. The yellow times basically are then independent work times. Those are the times where the student is at home and it's asynchronous working, where they are really just doing the work that's been assigned to them. Just want to make sure that we bring to our attention back to the grounding of the schedule. Once again, you'll see on Monday and Tuesday, Croton are in schedule, last names A through K in school. When we go to Thursday, Friday, you'll see that they're at home, and your Black Harmon schedule, your last names L through Z, are now in school on Thursday and Friday.
John, I'm sorry to interrupt you. There's just something here that I wanted to clarify, just in case people are wondering about it.
Sure.
I noticed at the bottom half of the bottom left-hand side of the PVC schedule, at the top it says Monday, Tuesday, but in the bottom section it says Tuesday, Wednesday. Is that just a typo? In the period 9 line?
Yeah, it could be that something didn't get corrected from an iteration.
Okay. Now, I just want to make sure. So that column, those left two most columns, well, I guess it's forward.
Yeah.
The 5th and 6th, the Monday column goes all the way down. It's not actually Tuesday at the bottom.
Gotcha. Yes, I got you. Yeah, that's a typo. Thanks for bringing it to our attention. We'll make that correction before we post everything to the website. It's Monday, Tuesday. Yes. Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
John, I'm sorry.
That's okay, Sarah. Go ahead.
If I could just ask another quick clarifying question. When looking at the PVC schedule versus the CET schedule, in the CET, you had ELA block and then ELA with remote teacher. Is that to indicate that that's being handled by two, like there's your teacher in your classroom and then there's a remote teacher who will be helping those students on the remote days, or is it the one teacher doing both?
No, at CET, there would be the classroom teacher, the homeroom teacher that would be with that half of the class all day long while it's their day in school. While that teacher is with that half of the class while they're in school, the other half of the class is doing those blocks with a dedicated remote teacher. So if there are 5 sections in a grade level, that remote teacher is basically going through and having a half an hour section with just that one classroom section of 12 kids, and then going for the next half an hour to the next section with those 12 kids. So that's very small personalized learning. And that is that remote teacher's assignment, to be able to deliver that instruction remotely.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that was clear for everybody.
Thank you. I'm happy for that. And then lastly, very, very similar to the thinking of the middle school schedule is the high school schedule, where once again, the green sections, when we're looking at the at-home schedules, are times when we are synchronously dialing into the classroom with the rest of the class. What we're seeing, however, because within the teaming model of the middle school, through all of the periods of a day, we are able to keep them within cohorts. It's much more difficult to do this at the high school level with the course selections at any grade level in 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. So therefore, in order to really maintain less movement, since from period to period, the cohorts are more likely to be mixed, we have said, let's do a block schedule. So we do not do 8 periods in one day. We are doing on any one day the odd periods or the even periods, and we're doing extended blocks. So now what you'll see on Monday, those orange schedule that are in school are just doing periods 1, 3, 5, and 7 for extended blocks. And now they are not going to be doing periods 2, 4, 6, and 8 until the next day. So that's quite a difference. I want to to draw just to everybody's attention on all of these schedules. We still are saying that the times that are here are subject to change. We still are really working with transportation as a key focus area to look at all implications for bringing kids to school, having them leave, having staggered arrival and dismissal times. So I just want to bring to your attention as a board and to the public's attention that these are all times throughout all of these schedules that may be needed to be adjusted to meet that and any other need. So at this point, I'm going to stop because that was a lot. That's just scenario 1 out of 4. But I want to make sure, because it's foundational to everything we're going to be doing with the 3 examples we're going to be looking at in scenario 2, to stop and see if there are any other clarifying questions.
John, I have a quick question with the high school, because I truly appreciate how difficult the high school scheduling could be. Does this mean a student would only be in their class once a week with their teacher?
That is correct.
And then the other 4 days, that class, when would so period 1, would the asynchronous learning for period 1 occur for the orange at home Croton students on Thursday? Would be their second time that they would have that block for that subject?
Yes, it would be, but what we also have to remember is that what we're planning for the e-learning day, we don't have it written out in these schedules because they're still being refined, but that would be an 8-period day. So there would be 3 contact times in every week with your teacher.
Okay, thank you.
John, Iris's question really helped clarify something for me. I'm wondering where office hours are scheduled in here by building level, CET, PVC, and the high school, and when does that happen, either virtually or in person?
So it is built into the high school schedule because we did retain the period 9 helping period.
Okay.
So that is built into the schedule. There is also within all of the schedules, really that time when there are working within a hybrid model to really hopefully have that time to get formative feedback. So the idea is less on having dedicated time for office hours and more thinking about those moments when we're having synchronous classroom times as a time where teachers are going to be able to hone in on independent and collaborative work, hear how it's going, and offer formative feedback at that time.
Okay. Okay, I'll have to think about that. And I just 2 more questions. Are we in the process of identifying who the remote teachers are going to be at the CET level? Like I'm just assuming that you're in the process of identifying who those people are, and they might overlap with people who have concerns about coming back in person, who risk factors that would make it harder for them to come back. But
there are a lot of, we have not finalized who those teachers are.
Okay.
But certainly we would definitely consider factors like that. We are also looking at where there is talent within our non-assigned classroom teachers who are certified teachers in our support areas to really take a look at really the full range of talent that we have at CET, and then just really best utilize our staff.
That's a great, thank you. And then I guess the last question is about, so I thought the point you made was excellent about if you do AABB, that architecture, and you have Mondays with a lot of holidays. So how are we thinking about the fact that we have a lot of holidays on Mondays, and whoever is, whoever's doing if we do AA or, AB, like, but how are we going to address holidays basically on Mondays is what I'm asking.
Yeah, honestly, right now, Beth, it's a compelling question. When we did go to the Wednesday e-learning day, in the cost benefit analysis, we obviously lost that benefit and have yet to really have that be part of our planning. So more to come on that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And Beth, to your, just to piggyback on that, Beth, that's a really good question with the, which led John to say the cost benefit analysis. I think that's a critical piece for everything. So any plan we're putting forward, okay, these are the positives of it, these are the negatives, and where do we land? So just keep that in the back of your mind, because those are the things we keep going. Well, what about, and keep going back and forth on that. And the other link I'd like to make to connect to what you've just said, we are having those discussions about, the appropriate staff member for, whatever piece, which is making, believe it or not, the hard copy calendar extremely challenging for us. I know it's beloved, and we have changed it a million times. Even my introduction letter that we always put in there, I've changed it a million times because it's written not knowing the guidance yet, right? Because you have to get to printers, et cetera. So that's something that we'll revisit. We might want to go just electronic for a while until we are more set. I don't know, but it's something I will come back to, which connected to what you said, Beth.
And I just went back a slide, just to refer back to another question Beth asked earlier. I was remiss that in the PV schedule, during period 1 for 5th and 6th grade, there is a build check-in time that I know was an optional time for kids that needed it, that was allocated in the PVC schedule. So I just wanted to go back and correct myself with regards to at least 5th and 6th grade having that opportunity.
And so I guess my point would just be, and I think this is excellent, is just the cost benefit of analysis around office hours at CET, because it sounds like at least at the PVC in high school, it's been thought through and how essential that is. And then if we're not specifically designating, how are we thinking about it? How are we preparing our teachers and our students to be able to have the opportunity to ask questions when they don't know what's going on?
So I will go back one more slide, because I also was remiss in not explaining, especially since I know there's a lot of complexity. So, but we see a lot of iterations of these slides over and over again. So while we're on scenario 1, it's probably really good to just cover our bases, because one of the things that I also skipped over was we have in the at-home days those win periods. Those win periods, if you've been through CET, it's for what I need. Those would be times when that remote teacher would be available to not work with everybody, but really see, based upon the formative assessment through ELA and math, who needs what, and be able to pull smaller groups together for that what I need kind of an event. So that was also another thing that I think starts to get at what you're asking, that is built into the schedule. And I want to make sure I just went back and also covered that as well.
Great, thank you.
Can you tell what the acronym is? Can you say the whole thing for when, like what the acronym stands for?
Yes, what I need. So it's meant to be a time for differentiation, whether you are struggling, whether you could use a little extra, or whether you want to sort of take it off in a different direction. It's that time that's dedicated in our schedule for kids to get what they need.
Yeah. Josh, you had a question?
Yes. I have several actually. So you're not getting off that easy. You got to go back. So luckily, one of them. I'm skipping one of them because they were already answered. the first one should be an easy one to knock down. What do we do about just to make sure that we know that there are some households where not all of the kids in the household have the same last name?
Yes, so we realize the need to tweak. That is one of the scenarios that we talked about needing to tweak. The other place where we saw a need to tweak would be there happens to be one grade level. So we first were thinking, let's go A through L, M through Z. We did the analytics and we saw, wow, that's really grossly out of balance. It was like almost 70-30. So we did an A through K, L through Z, and we realized we were almost balanced. One grade level in PVC, still with that balance, is like 70-30. So now what we're going to have to do is go to that 30 side and say, where are their families? Actually, we have to go to the 70 side. Where are those families that don't have siblings? And maybe make some tweaking that way so that we balance it out.
Understood. So there's going to be some fine tuning around that.
Exactly.
Okay. So the next one is all of these plans involve some online instruction or a mix of online and remote. And I'm a little bit worried that this is pushing us away from the differentiated interactive instruction that we normally do, and away from, things like modeling curricula and, some of the more advanced, the more modern curriculum techniques that we use, and more back towards sage on the stage kind of instruction, so the frontal instruction, because of what has to be online. And I'm wondering, what are we doing to address that? Are there ways that, it's more, not so much of a question, it's just something that I think we need to pay attention to in our professional development for teachers as they prepare for this, and how to prevent online instruction from devolving into lecture.
So it's something that we have given great thought to. And we will be covering our professional development plan at the end of this presentation. And we can really circle back around to that, but you're absolutely right. What's really important is to give our teachers time to think about how this learning, how these schedules are implying a very, very different modality of learning, and really to plan in our instructional design for a level of flexibility that is very, very adaptable to these learning situations, whether a kid is at home, whether they are all together at home, whether they are in school, and think in each of these scenarios, how can what we set as a learning expectation, how can the tools that we give really continue to create learning situations that are active, that are relevant, that are cooperative, that are engaging, that are joyful. That's like my mantra, those 5 right there. And that is something that is very, very much tied into the ongoing work that we're planning for this summer.
Thank you. The next one, looking specifically at the high school schedule, and I think, I'm not sure who asked me, I think that I'm a little bit worried still. My concern is about the number of touch points with students. If students are only seeing their teacher in person 1 day a week, and then, there's the, I think the second touch point was the green bars, if I'm the light green bars,
yes.
Which is if they're on the alternate day. So that if it was a Monday, it would be on the Thursday. If they were in school on period 1, so they're having a full period with their teacher at period 1 on Monday, and then on Thursday they're having just the first 20 minutes, if I'm reading this correctly, together with their teacher online. But that doesn't really afford an opportunity for one-on-one interaction, right? Does that? I mean, is the intent that 20-minute period is for Q&A, addressing an individual student's issues, or is it more, well, I'm going to tee up what we're going to be covering today?
So it could be I wouldn't be a tee up of what we're covering today, because as we're, this is going a little bit in the weeds, and I don't want to go too far, but we wouldn't be what we're covering for a day, because the whole learning methodology that we're considering is looking at learning in terms of weekly learning arcs. So it might be that on a Monday, if you happen to be launching that arc, that when you're checking in, it might be a kind of a mini lesson. But certainly later in the week, it might be much more about those kinds of individual check-ins where you've got, 10 or 12 kids in a group and really spending that time asking them questions and dialoguing and assessing their understanding of the learning objective of that particular week.
Is there any flexibility around the length of that? So, for instance, if a teacher wants to conduct a Socratic discussion of some topic, is that something that could be? Is there flexibility to extend that period? Is that up to the teacher? Is that?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that. Really, those are set up to be a minimal expectation. We wanted to make sure that we had a guarantee. And that's
Okay.
really there as a guarantee. Knowing our teachers, I would be very surprised if a lot didn't take advantage of going beyond that expectation. And also the first 20 minutes just happens to be a placeholder to have it sort of visually make sense as you look at the schedule and see that consistency. It could be the second, it could be the third. So there might be time in instruction where it makes sense to have it be the second 20 minutes, because that way, the first 20 minutes, I can really get the class that is in front of me going, check their understanding, make sure that they're independently working on whatever problem is at hand before I'm going online and being able to really give my attention to the group that's at home.
Got it. Okay. Let's see, that one I was in. The live sessions, one of the things that I grow a little bit concerned about is technical difficulties. I mean, we've seen technical difficulties on our own board meetings and so on. Will we be recording the live sessions so that if a student has had technical difficulty and is not able to connect, they will be able to view them time shifted?
We do have some issues with recording, not a technology consideration, more legal considerations. So before doing that, we really have to check with DEBA and council, make sure that we're complying with FERPA and all the regulations that would we'd have to be concerned about before we gave a definitive, here's teacher what I want you to do.
Got it. Okay. And I have a couple other questions that I'm going to reserve for the end.
Okay.
John, can I just ask,
yeah.
Andrew, I'm sorry, can I just jump in?
Right.
John,
Right.
I'm taking the school law seminar tomorrow and Wednesday. If there are any questions you want me to present at that seminar, if you email them to me, I'll be more than happy to see what the lawyers are thinking at this time.
That's great. Yeah, I think the question of live recording, synchronous instruction, I think comes up a lot. And I think that would certainly be, addressing, Josh's question.
We will email you though, Iris, because the second piece was the earlier question that Brian raised about, so the governor says, let's say schools are open, where the local education agency, the LEA, do we in fact have that flexibility? So that is a legal question. So thank you.
I'm sorry to add one follow-up, and it's just something else to think about. I apologize. We just need to think about, is there any hardware that we're going to need to purchase to make this happen also?
So I just want to answer that directly. We are pursuing some hardware, document cameras. Our DEBA is working on a plan so that our teachers will each receive a device. Our students will have a device. And then if there are any Wi-Fi issues, we would have, I believe it's MiFi for that. But yes, so yes to your question, Josh.
Okay, I have a question just about, this is very complex. And then there's another layer of complexity when we start dealing with special ed students. And, with individualized educational plan, it's going to look different for each student. But I'm wondering if we're providing an opportunity, or if we should have a special time where, or if Karen's going to be reaching out to these parents to really sit down and go in deep about these special issues for each student. Once we get the setup. I mean, I know it's very complicated. I don't know if it's something that you'd like to have like a special meeting just for for special ed students, or if that's not even, you know, if that doesn't provide enough discretion that people maybe want to meet one-on-one with Karen. I'm just wondering how that's going to be addressed.
So most definitely, that's a very important piece. Each student, of course, has a case manager, and that would be very important to have the dialogue with the case manager and how to best meet the needs of students. We are having discussions about our special classes, perhaps coming in every day. We'll talk more of that when we get to other schedules. But for example, the 2 classes of special class at CET, maybe having a daily schedule. So there's still conversations associated with special ed, but most definitely, Andrea, special ed is very much a part of the plan that we are submitting, as is ELL, as is mental health. And they are all parts of the plan that have a level of specificity to them. So to your point, yes, that would need to be very individualized discussions. And of course, how to meet what's in a child's IEP or 504 plan.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful for families just to know that it's being addressed, which, you know, just because until people hear, they get concerned.
Sure.
Right. And,
Yeah.
you know, there's push-in support, and then there's also like at the different levels there, like in high school, there's like the room where students would go in for extra homework support and all kinds of things. So it's just, how's that going to look in like on a e-learning day, or how's that going to fit in with everything else? It just, I think it's just important to know how that's going to look.
You got it. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I jotted that down. Okay, now what John said was a lot of what he did in scenario 1 was to lay the foundation. So you'll see it to be a little iterative with some changes. So I think we'll be able to move a little more swiftly through our other scenarios. Scenario 2 is a large section. It's the second set of scenarios presents split schedules for older students while exploring our capacity perhaps to have our younger students attend school daily. So you'll see a few scenarios and we'll take you through those. This is all though one theme, if you will. Split schedules for olders, but seeing, can we bring our youngest learners in for more of 100% of the time? So let's take a look at that. Before doing so, remember we said we would constantly talk back, bring back some survey data. So why are we interested in bringing some of our youngest learners back in and looking at scenarios, that pertain to them? So you can see from the pie chart there, it was a general question of overall, how did your child cope, adjust to the stay-at-home period? What we did then was got some good information, as you can see, but then we wanted to drill down and look at a breakdown of that question by school for specifically the numbers of students not too well or struggled. So you can see in the CET area, the larger not too well, there were some concerns and struggle, needed support, etc. So we took that information and says, okay, what would it look like if we brought some of our youngest, students back? So the first one we'll look at is, what if we had a model that brought in kindergarten and first graders back to school every day, 100% in person. And then with the rest of the district, grades 2 through 12, following the split schedule we just talked about. So, John?
So if we have K and 1 in the building every day, we still have a need for them to be socially distant. So therefore, what we want to do is take every single classroom section and still split it into 2. So teachers would then do direct instruction with half of the class, while the aide would be supervising independent work for the other. And then the 2 would flip so that the teacher could spend some time with the other half of the class and the aide would be with the other half of the class. But what we see is we need to now have 2 separate spaces. So rather than having 6 locations for 6 sections of kindergarten, we need to allocate 12 spaces for kindergarten, and we need to allocate 12 classrooms for first grade as well. The good news is we can basically supervise those alternate locations with our current teacher aides that are on staff at CET. So if we look at how that plays out now in a schedule, you're going to see a schedule that should look very familiar to you with a little twist. So now when we look at Monday, we still see that there is an orange in-school schedule and a black at-home schedule. These 2 columns are the same as they were in the last version we saw. However, it's only applying to grades 2, 3, and 4, because now K and 1 is in Monday. Yellow header there, K and 1 in Tuesday. In Wednesday during the e-learning day. In Thursday, and in Friday. They are in school daily. Once again, we have an example schedule. Every single classroom would have specials at a different time when they would be with their primary teacher, with their aide supervising, might be at different times. But this is just to give you an example that they are in school and they are having a normal day of school. When we're looking at PVC, no impact. This is the same schedule. When we're looking at the high school, no impact, same schedule. So I'll pause for a moment and see if there is clarity with what's being suggested in scenario 2A.
John, maybe this is a question I asked for N about like capacity constraints as it relates to classrooms. Is that something I should wait for the end of the scenario or right now?
When you're talking about capacity constraints, are you talking about the individual numbers we could fit in a typical classroom?
I'm talking about, right. I'm talking about how some, the basics, if you look at it from the lens of a health perspective, you want every classroom to have the windows to be able to be opened. You want fresh air. You could, the state has given us permission to do things outdoors and in playgrounds. And so I just want to I don't know all those rooms you just said, but I don't know if they're equal. So I guess I want to understand the lens through which we looked. Are all of those rooms, do all of those rooms have windows? Do those windows open? Can air be circulated? Equity in those classrooms is what I'm trying to figure out. And then if not, are we considering alternate classrooms like outdoors, which could be really interesting. So, but I can reserve that question for later, because it would apply across this. So.
So you will, I'm sorry, John, you will see this, Beth, throughout. And these are, again, these are examples.
Okay.
You raise a good piece. We have, as we are going through this process, Paul Gibbons, as you can imagine, and the head custodians are going room by room, looking at the structure of the room, the layout of the room. How would the desk be arranged to maintain the 6-foot distances? and what the capacity of the room is. They're also looking at all of the features you've brought up. And so that's why these are examples. So for example, Batista would be in 21, and then the other half of that would be library. And they're looking at all of those pieces, Beth. And to your point about outdoors, we do bring that up, I think later on in a slide, but
Great.
I can easily, it's not a deep comment that I was going to make later. But yes, the state has said, please, take students outside and et cetera. We do, and we have explored that a little bit in terms of our spacing, but just with even with a regular schedule, we always encourage, if there's an opportunity to get out and get fresh air, we're going to be taking that opportunity.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions before we go on to scenario 2B?
Give me just a moment. No, I'll hold it for later. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay, so now 2B. The next thing we did was explore having grades K through 4 in school 100% of the time. And then same principle, then grades 5 through 12 would still follow the same split schedule. Again, the thinking, going back to our survey data, trying to get the little ones in, our youngest learners in, what could that look like? So that's going to be the next thing we take a look at, okay? And the thinking there. So John?
So now for this scenario, we have to find a secondary space for every classroom section from kindergarten through 4th grade. So that means we have to find 12 additional classrooms for kindergarten and 1st grade still, but now we also need 15 additional classroom spaces for 2nd through 4th grade. We also then have to find 27 staff members to supervise these areas. What we can see in the scenario is that we can still use our aides to supervise the alternate spaces for our primary classrooms. We then have to look at our support staff for upper elementary. But a huge implication of this model is that we do run out of space for all of our students at CET. You'll notice in this plan that the entire 3rd grade is attending school at PVC and utilizing some of their support staff for at times for supervision. And the entire 4th grade is at the high school, and there are times when we're using some of their aides to support learning as well.
Before you go on with that, just to talk about the 2 buildings, both PVC and the high school identified space where the group of students, the grade level, would be separate from the rest of the school. So for example, at the high school, they were targeting the wing, I believe, for ELA and social studies. So the students would have, that grade level would have their own wing, they would have their own bathroom, et cetera. So they would not be mixing with the students. It would be, the classrooms would be separate, and no other students would be using those classrooms. It would be dedicated to that grade level, just to share that piece.
What does support staff mean? Like in 3rd grade, if I'm seeing, because it's not the same as aide or teacher. So what does that specifically mean?
So support staff would be a faculty member, so it would be a certified teacher. It might be somebody who is in a support role, such as a reading teacher, a math specialist, a teacher on special assignment, covering a special area, things of that nature.
It's a teacher.
It's a teacher, yeah.
Yeah, that helps. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
No problem.
Though, John, I just want to add, in some of the situations, though, John, just to be clear, it could be, it could be even counselor piece too, in some, and like we have perhaps a speech therapist in for a class, et cetera. So it could be expanded a little bit, Beth, but we're targeting the first piece that John said. This is an all hands on deck model. And we're going to come back to that shortly, but I don't want to thwart any other questions.
I just want to quickly follow up on that, which is with our teachers that are providing services and our aides that are supporting students, how are we going to handle that if we're having them do different assignments? I'm wondering how that's going to look. Are we hiring additional people? I know we're really tight with our budget, looking at possible future budget cuts. But I just want to make sure that we're making all our requirements, providing everything that we need to for our students.
So you're going to hear, Andrea, so thank you for bringing that up. You're going to hear some feedback on this model from our discussions with the task force, et cetera. So hold on to that piece. And because this is an extremely tight model. Again, we went through an exercise to be able to present it to the task force and board and community to explore how to get our youngest learners in. And I want to come back to some of the issues that came with this particular model very shortly.
And also and I'm sure you're going to be touching on that, but I'm interested to hear from a developmental perspective, why K1 versus the other grades. And I know there's good reasons, but I'd love to hear more about that.
So that you mean why we targeted K1 for the 100% being in that question?
And not second grade, or, why you're considering K through 4 in terms of the cost benefit analysis, so to speak.
So I think it's prudent to say at this point, in our thinking, we're sharing our thought processes with you and how we evolved. We went from K1 then to the K4, and you're going to see, you can already see by your questions, the concerns that this model brings. After we finish this, we're going to show how we then took a step back to look at K2 and reasons why, et cetera. So we're getting there in our discussion.
So I appreciate, thank you. I'll wait.
Oh, no, my pleasure, my pleasure.
I know that the board members all know the answer to this question, but I think it might be useful for also for our public to since you already mentioned that support staff are certified teachers or perhaps a counselor or such, but the aides have different certification. If you could clarify that some of that distinction, I'd appreciate that.
So it really comes down to when it comes down to aides, their definition as defined by Civil Service of Westchester County. It does permit them to be in a supervisory role over students and to basically under the direction of a teacher to be able to supervise activities, do everything they can to maintain order and control. And really make sure that they stay on task with whatever learning assignments are given by a teacher, and to really sort of manage and maintain the health and well-being of the space.
Okay. Thanks.
And Debbie, and everyone, I know you mentioned, because at the task force, it was discussed how PVC and the high school would plan to segregate the younger students that were in their building by placing them in a separate wing and make sure that the walls reflect the atmosphere of feeling like at CET, so that the students would feel in a more, an environment more conducive to their age. But I still had the concern that, even if they had their own bathroom, at some point they're going to go down the hallway, and the development between the two different age groups, a high school senior, God bless their hearts, may say some words that we don't necessarily want our third graders to hear, or our fourth graders, or just maybe talking about something appropriately, but is age appropriate for their group. not necessarily for a fourth grader here. So this model I know works on some ends, but my concern with the social emotional differences in the two groups, the little kids may be good influences on the elder students, but it also could cause some really
Okay,
sticky
so
situations.
thank you, Iris. So if John, you could just move ahead to, because the questions are now surrounding where the task force and our thinking. So John just went through the same two slides, right? Because for PVC and the high school, they wouldn't change. So what we did was we used the thought exchange tool with our task force after presenting scenario. So don't worry about the numbers, what they're calling scenario numbers, because we mix them all up for those purposes. So you can see here that there's the concern with the things you've raised. So I don't love the idea of third and fourth being in other buildings. It would be very emotional for them. Having third and fourth graders in the high school is least preferred, even in a separate wing. So we wanted you to see the work of the task force in coming up with different scenarios of trying to get students into the building for childcare reasons, for the data of the piece on, they had the most difficulty, if you will, with the learning platforms given their age. So, but we're thinking that the K4 model, and we wanted you to know that we explored it based on feedback in what you see here and based on the staffing piece. We are tapped if we go with the K4 model. But we really felt we needed to do our due diligence with looking at it. We are tapped with the K4 model, and somebody might say, well, we don't like having them in the high school or the middle school, but can we find another community-based place that we could have, let's say third grade or let's say fourth grade? Okay, so looking at that piece, if you John, just jump to the next slide. Looking at that, we did have conversation with, what if we moved the third grade to, let's say, the village municipal building, or what if we moved fourth grade to, I don't know, making it up, Holy Name of Mary came up. So when we looked at it, even from, okay, people might not be comfortable having the little ones in PVC and the high school. If you went back to those models, the K4 model, we needed to avail ourselves to our human resources. So in order to make that work with third or fourth grade, we need to use some of the high school aides, teacher aides, or we needed to use some of PVC's staff in order to make it work. So it wasn't just a space issue. So looking at a community-based place wouldn't help us, because we needed, in that model, we needed to rely upon the staffing opportunities from the other buildings. If you can see in this visual, yes, we have our 3 buildings. Yes, we can find space within our 3 buildings, but for the K4, but we needed to avail ourselves a critical piece to the staff that's there too, to make it work. And again, when I say make it work, what I mean is to be able to give, the prep time and lunch times and all of those intricate pieces that go into scheduling. So that was something I also wanted to bring up. The third thing I hear a lot about is, could we put a physical tent with walls and heaters and things? I hear that often, or get that question posed often. And the answer is, again, it's not a physical space, necessarily a physical space issue. It's that human piece. So we may have to be using the staff in the other buildings in order to make that schedule work. So I will tell you that because of those pieces, we're shying away from the K4 model. And something else I think, Beth, that you raised was we can't be tapped so tightly that one of the support staff will now be needed to run a second half of a group and maybe not be able to pay attention to the roles and responsibility within their support role. So we feel that it's too tight. It would require, I think this goes back to Andrea's question, a tremendous number of hirings in terms of teacher aides or lunch monitors in order to make that work. Not to say in any of these scenarios we don't need some staffing. We are exploring, and we do believe we have a slight need even with the other scenarios. And the last thing I want to bring up is we're also interviewing to increase our substitute pool. Well, I will also tell you, as is every other district. So, I worry about the model being so tight that, really one absence that we are not able to get a substitute for can really create an issue in a model that is too tight.
And Dr. O'Connell, to just follow that up, is just to say that that provides like a whole other level of stress and a whole stressful situation to begin with. If people don't feel comfortable that they can take time off if they need to, or if something,
right.
It really, we have to err on the side of caution in terms of this.
Right. And I think to your point, Andrea, we look at things from a space resources, right? And we look at them from our human resources. So, how best to leverage our human resources. And again, something too tight has a lot of issues to have a break in the system. And stress, I hadn't noticed any. Thanks for bringing it up. So anyway, any questions on that piece? So I think you can see that led us to looking at a K2 scenario. And again, you might say, why are we looking at scenarios again to bring in a grade level at 100%? That goes back to some of our survey data. And that goes back to the understanding that in order for people to get to work, we need to, kids really need to be back in school. So we wanted to do our due diligence to look at, are there ways we can bring grade levels back, given our resources, given our constraints, and what are the opportunities? So,
Debbie?
Yes.
Before you go, one of the questions I was going to ask with the question of having classes outside, and I think there might be also, in addition to a space question, a question of the health and safety of bringing students into the buildings and maybe conducting classes on a daily basis outside by having some sort of outdoor temporary structure. So I'm not sure if that's something you have been able to address yet, but I see a lot of problems with a model like that on my own. But I think there was the component when I was looking at an email that went by earlier, I think there was also a component to it of, if I as a parent am uncomfortable with sending my student into the building, is there a way for classes to be held on a daily basis outside, not only, weather permitting, but every day?
Right.
So I just wanted to throw that into, not for a conversation or discussion, I don't know how it
I'll just add one piece to that, Iris, and that is the language is pretty clear that if you change anything in your building, like some folks were thinking, not Croton, but some folks were thinking, I'm going to take my cafeteria and build a temporary divider, or take my multi-purpose room and do some cordon off with temporary structures. Let's put a huge tent, think about the tent we have at graduation, let's just say. Let's put up a tent on the facilities for instruction. the guidance is very clear that that needs some level of state approval with SED. We felt that we had it within our, the space within our facilities, that we wouldn't be looking to erect any tents or things for the need of having state ed approval. I don't know, John, if you want to add anything to that, but I know that was part of our discussions along the way.
Nope.
But Dr. O'Connell, just to be clear, and Iris, I think you made an excellent point, but to make the distinguish, so you're specifically saying extra like tents and like building structures, but I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but having read the guidelines, it did specifically say outdoor space could be considered, playgrounds and things. So I just want to make the point to the public that you're saying like temporary buildings that would have to be built or temporary structures that would have to be built would need state approval. But
Correct.
They already gave us permission to be able to use outdoor space and to consider using outdoor space.
Very good point, Beth, and thank you for hitting the pause button on that. There's nothing preventing us from saying, you know what, and we would be very, coordinated in our efforts because of hallway traffic and all of that, right? So there's nothing preventing us from, just like we do now, when school was in our normal settings, of nothing prevents us from taking classes outside. So, thank you for hitting the pause button on that. Where the guidance is very specific is you can't just put up a tent and say, I'm going to have a class now under this tent. Or I can't put up this divider now and say, look, now I have 2 rooms. Anything along those lines, Beth, the guidance says there needs to be an approval from the state, but nothing prevents us from taking students outdoors.
So essentially that would have to be just an ad hoc teacher by teacher case basis, and like the weather's good, if they want to take the class outside, the lesson they're working on lends itself to them being outside. So it would have to just be in that sort of a case by case basis, correct? So
Sarah, to your question, that is a conversation that we are still having, but I wouldn't want it to be so ad hoc, or willy-nilly, if you will. Those would be conversations we'd be having as an administrative team on how to coordinate best use of outdoors, et cetera. So that's still in discussion. So I don't want to say we're fully where we want to be on that, but we would want it to be a concerted planning effort.
Dr. Yeah, and I would just, if I could reiterate what Sarah said, I think that's excellent. If you could just highlight in the future conversation for the community what the protocols and procedures would be, because I think the lens that people are probably coming from is the perspective of like outdoor transmission for COVID is highly unlikely. And so to the extent that you can explain to people how you're incorporating that into the planning and the thinking versus exactly what Sarah said, it not being ad hoc, but it's being more systemic and systematic. Right. Thank you.
Yeah, no,
sorry to interrupt, Andrea.
And because I had said, like, I had reservations about that when I raised the topic, Dr. O'Connell, I have to speak on behalf of those of us that have asthma and seasonal allergies. The thought of being outdoors all day would be an impossible learning atmosphere if I was a teacher or a student. So I know it may sound great for COVID, but there are other conditions that an outdoor space could make not ideal. And I'll always remember when we had the issue with the mold and the way leaves hold mold. And as a person allergic to mold, I wouldn't want to be outside sitting all day in leaves. So just so that there's the context, I raised it because that was within the email, but I do see a bigger issue with trying to hold class every day outside.
Exactly. And I'm so glad you raised that as well, because it is also a conversation and planning with our nurses and the asthma protocols and the, if you think about the other things for consideration are ticks and mosquitoes and, you know, things along those lines. So those are not far from the conversation as well. So that's why I think to look at the words ad hoc or versus having something systemic, it needs to be a very deliberate conversation, balancing all of those pieces and what that could look like. So that's why I don't want to say, yes, outdoors are part of our conversations, but just like every piece to this conversation, it's extremely detailed, multifaceted, implications. We'd also want to have Dr. Meir in our conversations. Our nurses are constantly having conversations with Dr. Meir. So it's far more intricate than just saying, yes, we're going to go outside. Okay.
I could,
Denise?
if I could just interject for a second and just reviewing the guidance.
Josh, I think Denise wants to pop in for a second.
In just reviewing the guidance, it speaks to transportable classroom units or spaces such as tents. And it indicates that the Office of Facilities Planning will need to review and approve these
Right.
types of spaces.
Yep. Thank
Just
you,
to
Denise.
clarify.
Okay, Josh? And you're breaking up a bit.
I think Josh is frozen now.
I think he might be.
Okay. All right. So can I go to scenario 2C? Now you can see the areas we highlighted. Oh, is Josh back?
Okay.
No, Josh, we can't hear you. You're breaking up. Not yet.
Not really. Josh, if you want to chat your question to us, we can bring it up then for you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to 2C. Oh, I guess not. This is the technical difficulties we were referencing before.
Absolutely. Yeah, Josh, you're still breaking up.
I see his chat. We also need to consider security for outside classrooms. So yes. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, that is.
Josh, your system is not at all working, so we cannot understand you.
And he's on mute. So I don't understand.
There's some kind of a weird issue going on. He's on mute, so we shouldn't hear him.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I'll move on, pretending I don't hear that. So, so scenario 2C, I think you can see, again, we went through the concerns with K4. You know, so we went through the process, but we examining it from that lens, we saw that we had a human resource issue of not having enough staff for a comfort level. So then we went and looked at K2. So we had the K1 scenario, then we went to K4, but let's take a look at 2C, if you will. Grades K and 2 are in school 100%. And then that same, you know, paradigm of grades 3 through 12 following a split. So John?
Sure. So I think the one obvious advantage to this schedule, and if you know CET well, you're starting to see that we're not using a lot of 100 and 200 level rooms. So that means that we have, with this model, enough room for every student in CET to stay in CET. So once again, we're following the same model that you've seen in earlier versions, 2A and 2B, where we're finding a secondary space for everybody within the building. To address Andrea's earlier concern, none of the aids used in what you're seeing in front of you are mandated aids that are covering any support for a student with an IEP. And we're able to look at a situation where we have an alternate learning space for everybody, kindergarten, first, second grade, a person to supervise those secondary classroom spaces and have them work within a schedule that looks like the similar model. However, now when you look at the yellow column headers each day of the week, you see that we are able to bring in grades K through 2 on a daily basis. That means now the Croton and Harmon schedules would be applying only to 3rd and 4th grade. The e-learning day on Wednesday only applying to 3rd and 4th grade. Once again, as we looked ahead, PVC has no effect. Their space is not being used either. CHHS, no effect, and their space is not being used either. That is 2C.
Okay, so it's really, you're seeing an iterative process. This was now looking at trying to get another grade level in with a little bit more of a comfort. So K and 1 or K1 and 2 gives us a little more breathing room, would allow us to bring students in 100% of the time following what John just described, and then the remaining grades with the split as described. Any questions on that?
Dr. O'Connell, I'm assuming you're going to tell us what you prefer, K through 1 and K through 2, and why.
Right. We're still, I want to still work with the task force on that. I don't know if that'll come out tonight.
Okay.
And you'll also hear, because we're very much in tune with having community voice, and in these scenarios, these Zoom meetings, et cetera, I feel like opportunity. So you'll see before we close, we're asking for some feedback on the models we have shared tonight. So Beth, I don't think you'll hear where we've landed or in terms of a recommendation yet, because we want to give some more opportunity for the community to share their thinking. And we'll explain that before we get out of this presentation tonight.
Great, thank you.
So can I move to 3? Okay, so I think on this one, do you notice the little sticky? This is something, so Iris, to your question, we're still sorting out legally a little bit. And I would love to have maybe somebody from the NYSBA legal team weigh in on this piece. So before I get started, on 31, page 31 of the document, the state ed document that was published, speaks to this particular scenario. So let me identify what's there. Looking at scenario 3, full-time distance learnings for families not able to participate in split scheduling. Okay, so take a look at that sticky. It says we're currently seeking guidance on to which student population this scenario may apply. So I just want to pause there for a second. On page 31 of the New York State guidance, it speaks specifically about medically vulnerable / high-risk groups. And it comes out and says, finally, if parents and guardians choose not to send their child back to school, schools will need to provide instruction remotely. It then says, please see the section on special education for more details. So why we're seeking more guidance is because peppered in here and there throughout the large document, makes us feel like, I don't know, is that the only group they were talking about? Or is there a district expectation that there should be this district learning for families not able to participate in split? So we're still seeking guidance here, but let me just explain what it is we're talking about. So I think you're going to see some similarities. So John, do you want to move to the next 2 slides? 3 slides.
So what we're basically seeing should look familiar, because this is basically the model for the at-home sides of the schedule. So Monday, Tuesday, that really is the schedule for the Harmon schedule, and the Thursday, Friday, that's the schedule for the Croton schedule. So those would also be the times where those remote learning teachers would be on with half of the classroom sections. So the intention for a student who is in need of remote learning every day would be to be assigned to one of those classroom cohorts and receive that instruction on a daily basis, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. The option then, when we're looking at Wednesday, would be to consider how we could support that child through the e-learning teacher and to really structure perhaps more intensive supports. As we go on and look at the middle school schedule, we see it is following the same paradigm, where it is basically following that at-home schedule where there are those live check-ins and really providing those opportunities on a daily basis. In the absence of an e-learning teacher, that means that we would be putting that student in with a homeroom to be part of that e-learning experience on Wednesday. And then the same paradigm holds true for how we would handle it at the high school level as well.
So again, this is an area we have questions on. We're seeking guidance as to specifically which student population does this may apply to. And so on this one, we're still seeking more guidance.
So one thing I noticed on these, and then I guess it sort of brings me back to the earlier scenarios at home at CET, is that at PBC, it does seem that we are scheduling in some specials time through remote learning. But in this all remote, I don't see on the CET schedule any space for specials, where I do in the PBC schedule. So how would we, I guess, plan for specials from remote learning?
So there has been some conversation about utilizing the e-learning day partially for that, but it's not concretized at this point.
Okay. And have we given thought to, I guess maybe, well, you know, I can address that at the end of all of the different scenarios. I'll say my next question.
Okay, great. Any other?
I'm sorry. Does this mean that the student that's doing at home, I'm sorry, I'm very dense on this, is in instruction every day, or are they following a Croton or a Harmon?
So this is for the student first that wouldn't be coming onto campus at all.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
Go ahead, John, you can continue. I just wanted to make sure.
So they're basically following the at-home days all the time. So on Monday, Tuesday, they're following the Harmon schedule and they'd be dialing in with that cohort. On Thursday and Friday, when the Crotons are at home, they'd be following that schedule and dialing in with that cohort.
Okay, got it. Okay. All right. And moving on to, I can say, finally, scenario 4. So scenario 4, this is if we have a 100% remote learning due to a closure. So what if the governor says where schools are closed, like what we came in, into with March, where as of a certain date, our schools are closed for, various reasons. It could be the Department of Health saying to a school, based on whatever it is we're working through or dealing with, that you need to maybe close a school. So this scenario 4 is 100% remote learning due to a closure. And again, it could be for various reasons. So let's take a look at the thinking that went into these scenarios, John.
So right now, CET is in a rough draft form. So this is really just an indicator of the kind of thinking that we have right now, where there would be green synchronous times and yellow independent work times. What we're looking at right now as we're thinking about revisions to the schedule is the amount of screen time that would really be appropriate for a CET student. We know that we want to cover reading instruction and writing instruction and math to give time for specials, but we're also looking at balancing the amount of live time with the teacher with appropriate amount of screen time. But the important and salient point is that we would want each day to have scheduled live component and have that be part of our schedule model for CET. PVC and the high school are a little bit more firmed up because it's following more of a how do we cover the different periods at what time. What you'll notice is that Wednesday really follows that e-learning day kind of a thinking listed in blue on both schedules. It would be a time where we would be following, a student would be following the full period day, periods 1 through 8. What we then see on Monday and Tuesday and Thursday and Friday, this is a little bit confusing, so let me just explain. Try to keep the coloring consistent. So what we see in the mornings on Monday and Tuesday are labeled in orange. So this would be a time when our orange group would be meeting in the morning and have periods 1, 2, 3, 4, and then let's say 5, 6, 7, and 8. Only half the class for a more small, intimate online live setting. Then your L through Z's, your Croton schedules would come on in the afternoon and have those live sessions, half of the class with their teachers in the afternoon. And then basically it flip-flops on Thursday, Friday, where we've got the Harmon schedule in the morning and the Croton schedule in the afternoon. That plays out very similarly on the high school schedule. Once a day, your e-learning Wednesday, we're going through the whole schedule. But once again, in the morning, you'd have that half of the cohort following the Croton schedule, doing odd periods Monday, even periods Tuesday. Then in the afternoons, you'd have the Harmon schedule, your L through Z's come in, do the odds periods and the even periods.
So I think again to, take a moment to share, things we gleaned and learned from our March through June experiences that students should have touch points of live interaction each day. I think you see that permeating any of the models. And then from our student data also, how powerful they felt that the smaller groups with the live instruction was. So that was what we were trying to capture in a lot of these pieces. So before I take questions on that, if I can just go to one more slide, John, next slide, is another piece that's critical in our conversations that have to be with everyone, with the community, with the board, with the teachers, with all staff, and with our students, you get it, needs to be the understanding that we might have to move and be extremely fluid between various schedules. So we might need to one day be in a split schedule, but because of a scenario or circumstance, we then say, we need to move to a fully remote schedule. And this visual kind of just, puts that in perspective. We'll link it to the professional development piece and what John will share last. But again, we need to keep that message alive, that there needs to be this ability to move within, communicate when we need to make a change and pivot, and for what reasons, why we're pivoting, and then, but have that ability. So I like this visual to kind of drive that point home. So questions before we move to our last piece on preparing, working with teachers and getting ready.
So I just have one question. I realize, and John, I should have asked this in your first scenario. When I saw scenario 4, I realized science and social studies has been gone from the previous scenarios at CET. So can you help me understand, did I miss it, or where did social studies and science go?
No,
Instructions go for CET.
The intent is really to embed and integrate. So, the primary focus is going to be on maintaining daily ELA and math instruction. As we've been working with the primary teachers, that's just been something that's just been such a foundational need at that developmental level. That being said, we don't want to lose track of the other academic areas. And the intent where possible is really to infuse scientific reading, social studies reading into the ELA, where it's possible to connect, graphing, scientific, processes into the math curriculum to do so. But you're right, we are saying that they are ELA and math blocks, and that the other academic areas at the elementary level would be integrated into those blocks.
So I guess I'm hoping you'll address this in professional development about how are we going to train our teachers to be able to do that? Because as you might imagine, parents at CET might be, understand all the constraints under which we're operating, but be disappointed in the idea that some of the instruction that they were getting before in subject matters isn't going to be specifically provided. So.
And Beth, to your question, I know in scenario 1 in our visual, it does say an academic block is there. So as we go through the others, we do tend to focus more on the ELA and math. So to John's point, yes, integration, but as we're continuing to flesh that out, we can see, where an academic block could be put in place.
Great. So, So what I'm hearing you say, just to be clear, is that that's not final, that there is potential, and you're working on it. Okay.
Right. So, John, like if you looked at, you don't have to go back to it to lose our spot, but in your scenario 1 slide, it does show on the academic piece embedded in there.
Maybe I misunderstood Beth. I thought she was talking about in terms of remote instruction. In terms of when students are in school, they're following their normal day, which is inclusive of everything that they're doing now. So when a student is in school, there is nothing that is left out of the typical CET experience. It is what we are really honing in on those at-home days where we're looking at really keeping the math and ELA consistent.
I think Beth was discussing what meant, though, the remote learning, if I'm correct, Beth. Right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought Beth meant in the regular and the.
Right. I meant both, actually. And my visual memory is not great. So if I'm remembering, I don't have the slide in front of me, so you guys can whip back to it and tell me I'm wrong. But when I looked at the CET slide, it said, it did not say in the earlier scenarios that there were going to be, I saw an ELA and I see a math and I see special and I see academic, but maybe academic means
science and social studies. Yeah, that's what. And then when I saw later iterations, I saw remote social studies and science specifically called out. And so I just want to clarify for the public that we're not ditching science and social studies, that that we still are maintaining, our foundational curriculum. I'm so glad you offered that clarification, because I think that is an important point. I'm glad we went back so that we could see that, yes, in the CET schedules, what we did, because it does differ by grade level, and to create a column for every single grade level would be even more confusing than PVC schedule. So we did do that example schedule, and the academics was meant to indicate science and social studies. The other important thing just to mention on this note is that while they're at home, there is time within that day, because remember, they're doing ELA and math for 30 minutes within those long blocks with their classroom cohort. And there is time to work asynchronously on science and social studies as assigned by a teacher as part of the weekly learning. So it's not meant that when they're at home, science and social studies learning doesn't exist. It just meant that it would be working on it in those independent and cooperative learning tasks that are assigned by the teacher.
But I like that, John. If we could just, I know I took a note. I think we have to be more, have that explicitly stated somewhere in one of the blocks or something, because if you just looked at this, let's say on the website, you might draw the conclusion that that's not there, right?
I'll definitely make that note.
Yeah, good piece.
Well, it seems on the scenario 4 that is 100% remote due to closure. We do have those pieces. You do see spots for science and social studies and all of the specials.
Yeah, thank you. And again, those schedules, just a cautionary tale, that CET schedule, what we wrote in the margin there, we are very aware of how much time a child is in front of the computer, and is that sustainable? I just want to be clear. This one is really, the CET is still a work in progress, and what's the best developmentally and et cetera. So I just want to be clear on that. This is still very much a lively conversation. Okay, so
I was going to just say, I have a quick question, which I've been hearing the public ask, and it's come up with the re-entry task force, and with thinking about New York City has an opportunity for parents to opt for completely online learning. Like they can just choose that. I just keep remembering the governor's words where he's saying, I'm going to have to make my decision in the beginning of August, but a lot of parents will be making their decisions the night before, which, is probably very honest. I'm just wondering, as we find out, I know we're looking into finding out which students are eligible for completely online learning, but I'm wondering if it's something that we feel as a district, or we're still considering, or we're still struggling with that, or we're looking for more guidance about parents who just choose for whatever reason to opt for that.
So thank you, Andrea. Brings me back to the slide on scenario 3, where we had the little Post-it note on there. So we always want to understand what the guidance is saying, right? So we feel that in this area, the guidance hasn't been very clear. So that's step 1. We as a task force, we as an administrative team and district want to understand what it is they're actually saying. But that sticky said, we're currently seeking guidance, and just so we can understand what the document is saying. But we are having conversations for that very point. So what if a family isn't comfortable sending their child back? Does that full-time distance learning plan then apply for them? And that's a very a live conversation. So, but I think in order, just like with anything, we want to understand what the guidance is saying first, because I think there's been some ambiguity, and I want to clear that up before we can delve more deeply. Now, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but let's say that was where we landed, and that is an option for families that aren't comfortable. Now, does that then reduce the numbers that are in our cohorts? Okay, so just so you know, we are thinking of this. So we reduce those numbers. Would that then allow us to have more of the 100% in person? So just so you know, those conversations are going on. But I think we have to do our due diligence of understanding what the guidance document is saying first, and get that clarity where we need it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for explaining that.
Yeah, because Andrea, I was going to say, as soon as the New York City Department of Education posted that they were going to allow parents to decide by August 14th whether or not they wanted to opt in, the governor immediately came out and said New York City doesn't have the right or authority to do that. He will make that decision as to whether or not parents can do that. So I'm interested, like Debbie, to find out tomorrow, has the governor given any indication through this guidance that he's giving the districts that ability? Because he took it away from New York City the moment they did it. So I don't know what the next.
And to your point, Iris, thank you. And we'll try to get NISBA's on the law conference, get some clarity there. You know, it's hard. You all know in the feeling, it's hard to get in between these powers like, oh, no, I said this and no, I said that. And we just want to be clear, stay out of the fray and just, you know, stay the course of our planning, right? So that's why that clarity is so important. But while you bring that up about another piece that we're going to want to get information on, and it's not in our presentation tonight, is transportation. How comfortable are people going to want to be to have a child travel on a bus? We know that the New York State guidance and the Department of Health guidance within the New York State Ed guidance, it states clearly, should we say something that is counter to the DOH guidance, the DOH guidance takes precedent. So where transportation is concerned, there was a little bit of a different verbiage in the two documents. So we believe we've landed on, yes, everybody must wear masks while they're on the bus. And one of the community forums I want to have dedicated to having Rochelle explain all of the nuances with transportation, but social distancing where practicable. And that's also important, that, you know, she's giving thought to keeping siblings in this, can sit in the same seat. There'll be some social distancing, not the 6 foot social distancing, because you would only be able to have very few people on a bus. I think if that were the case, we'd have 56 runs to CET or some crazy number. So those things are important. So will parents feel comfortable using the buses or will they be opting to either walk to school or drop them off? So that's also an important piece that at some point we're going to have to get a handle on so that we can properly plan numbers, routes, et cetera. And we do have routes. Rochelle has been great. Any scenario we've thrown to her, fully split, a K1 bringing in, K4 bringing in, K2 bringing in. She's come up with the transportation scenarios to support them. So just so you have the community and board knows, those conversations are going on as well. So now can I move to the last piece, which is, okay, go ahead, John.
You know, we've talked about what about students that are medically fragile and cannot attend in-person instruction, but we all presumably we're also thinking about staff and faculty that have medical conditions that make it very risky for them to be physically in the classroom.
So that would be an individual conversation. I would not make any broad sweeping statements about staff, their needs, et cetera. Those would be individual conversations that John, as being in charge of personnel, would or myself be having with staff members to see what and assess what their level of need would be. But it's a very important piece, Josh, that you bring up. And those would be based on individual conversations with staff members.
Okay, thank you.
I did have one question regarding scenarios, and I guess a lot of it would sort of hinge on what comes out from the state and what clarification of the guidance is with regard to what decision making the district has on remote learning versus in person. But have we given any thought to looking at a scenario where maybe some of the things that lend themselves to more hands-on in-person learning, like specials at the elementary school or labs at the high school, things like that, where those were the focus of the in-person learning, and maybe special ed students who really needed to have more one-on-one time with their teachers and aides and resource room, having those more in person and giving some more flexibility to doing mass ELA remotely. Sorry, that's a lot to throw at you.
John, do you want to start?
I think that we are open. We are open to consider, especially when we're looking at special populations, how we do our best to meet the needs of learners. I think in terms of active learning and how we best utilize time when we're with a teacher, how we best utilize time when we're at home, how we best leverage technology tools is something that is really part of the present tense work that we're about to really address in this next and last section of the presentation. But I think you're right, Sarah, that as we look at these plans and eventually adopt a plan, I think we have to look at how we take that plan and how it's malleable around the needs of certain populations. We've mentioned those with IEPs. I like to take a look at the needs of our English language learners and really consider, as my lights just go off, how we really take the architecture of any of these schedules and consider how we can work within it to best address those cohorts' learning needs.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the last piece, and my God, board and community, thank you so much for giving us this time to go through the intricate work of the task force. And again, where the last piece is, on the professional learning. So John, if you would move to the next slide. And again, remember the preceding slide was about that fluidity between maybe that split schedule and remote schedule. And just think about that thinking in terms of even from an instructional lens. So what I've asked John to share with you in wrapping up tonight's discussion is what we've been doing in terms of professional development. Professional development before we left the school year, the professional development we had for staff between March and June. As the board and community may recall, after our students finished school, our staff was still here for a full week before they started summer vacation. So what kind of things we had going on there and what kind of things you have going on for July and August. So John?
So the first need that was identified with regards to professional learning was really addressing that we were suddenly in a world where we had to rely on technology in order to meet our responsibilities as educators. And it looked at how we could develop a system for implementing very, very robust, flexible opportunities to really get those skills within the toolkits of our faculty. So this is just an example of a compilation of resources that were put together, really vetting the best of asynchronous learning opportunities that were out there. This was then followed up by different members of our administrative team taking an expertise lead on these different tools and basically saying, if you need one-on-one individual tutorials after you take these, this is the person that you get in touch with so that we could schedule a time and we can really get you more hands-on experience, consider how you utilize these tools for your student population and your curricular area, and really consider how to make it actionable in terms of the learning of this past spring. This really then, before the end of the year, went into the next consideration, and this was that last week of June when the students were out and we had a week to offer courses. The orange technology courses really was going around and identified technology need that said we really need to have a clear and defined learning management system for our students. We realized that Google Classroom was utilized by a lot of teachers and that we had to make sure if there were teachers that needed really more expertise with Google Classroom, that that was happening and really starting now with second grade teachers. Where Google Classroom is not developmentally appropriate for our primary grades, to take a look at the tools that were used to identify one as our LMS, learning management system. In this case, we decided on Seesaw, and make sure that that was something that we were offering for our K-1 teachers. And then also forecasting the future, looking at the importance of addressing the social emotional impact of the pandemic on students, and making sure you see a lot of those courses in pink. We're really having them end the year thinking about, as they're entering their summer preparation, to think about, really how they were going to address what's going to be impending social and emotional needs when they return in September. And so that brings us up really to what we've been planning for the summer. And really it's around introducing you, and it's going to be just a mile-high view because it gets quite deep in terms of pedagogy and the rationale for why we're doing what we're doing. But I want to share with you the first plan, which is really details a 4-hour session that's going to be offered 10 times over the summer. 10 times because the idea of these 4 hours is for you to spend it with your grade level team or with a subject area team. I know you as a board know, I would like to reiterate it for both you and for our community, that we cannot mandate professional learning in the summer. We can incentivize professional learning. The way we do that, one of the ways is by making sure we have some robust and relevant offerings. So when we look at the rationale behind this 4 hours of learning, really what the first premise is saying is that there is a need for teachers to prioritize what they're going to be teaching. It is not going to be a typical 10-month schedule that they're used to. We know right away at the beginning of the year that they were going to have to spend some time addressing those social emotional needs I was just referring to. And nobody in the field is recommending that we hit them hard and heavy with content learning on the first day of school, that we're giving them pre-assessments and jumping in, that we really need to spend some time. And then as we are going through the scheduling scenarios, we could see that we are going to really need to consider how we identify what are the priorities. And that whole first session is really a discussion on prioritizing standards and having those identified priorities start to inform what are the essential content and skills that must be covered. Building resilient communities that adapt to change really goes back to that visual that Dr. O'Connell was just showing, that shows that there's got to be a resiliency to be able to move from the different schedules, from remote potentially to split and back again. And how we do it is something I'll talk about on the next slide, by thinking about learning in terms of learning arcs. But then to, at this point in the summer, have the final blended learning schedule, those split schedules, the final remote schedules, have them have an opportunity to unpack those schedules and to begin time to plan around how instruction in their early units will look within those split schedule models and within those remote schedule models. Which really brings me then into the more detailed view of learning. And this is really a design of a week-long course. This week-long course actually started today with 38 teachers online with me to do their day one. This also starts in a similar way to the 4-hour course, identifying priorities. Once we have those priorities established, using backwards design, looking at a unit, thinking about its essential learnings, thinking about the priorities we want, to then start to take those priorities and break them down into weekly learning arcs, which is basically something that we are presenting as a model for instruction that takes the onus away from discrete daily lessons, because we know it's going to be hard to think about parceling out small doses within a lesson with some kids at home, some kids in school, everybody 6 feet apart from each other at least. So we're thinking about how we're structuring learning around these weekly learning arcs. Then on day 2, we're thinking about assessment. We're thinking that assessment has to be active. It has to be relevant. It has to be something where they're up and they're exploring the world around them and making things, creating things, and that they have to be given different ways to be able to metacognitively self-assess their learning. They have to be given rubrics. They have to be given learning targets, models of previous students' work, so that they can really self-check their independent or collaborative learning tasks against some kind of a teacher tool that lets them know if they're on track or not. Then day 3 is all about leveraging technology. As we investigate the components of a learning arc, we have some common vocabulary that we're establishing, such as what is comprised of the beginning of the week launch. What is the expectation for independent work and collaborative work? How during independent and collaborative work are we checking in with students and providing them with formative feedback? How then are we bringing it all together for a close where we could jigsaw and piece together the different learning that we experienced, connected to the larger learning that's part of the overall enduring understanding of a unit? After that, really talk about technology. The ending of the week is really spending time, giving them time to construct all those components of a weekly learning arc for the beginning of their early unit and the closing of their unit. Once again, a very cursory overview of something that pedagogically within a week, we really could start to think about how we are able to take learning, have it exist in any of these very complex schedules, and have it be something that is, once again, active for our students, relevant for our students, cooperative in nature. ARC, that is the arc that I devised, but really more importantly, the overarching words that I'm using to try to communicate what our education must be for every single learner in Croton-Harmon to be engaging and to be joyful. Once again, recognizing that these are a very, very unusual, potentially scary time for our kids. So within these scenarios, how as teachers, we feel confident that we can deliver our learning, that we have spent time preparing for these unusual circumstances and predict how we're able to overcome those obstacles and do it with a real relevance and purpose to our instruction and with a real smile on our face that we're going to be okay. I want to just share with the board, I am very, very excited at this moment because even though this is going to be a very challenging year, we are learning new tools as a faculty. We are considering how to be flexible and use time in such a different way that, yes, this year is going to be a hurdle. When we're over this hurdle, our district is going to look very, very different in a very exciting way. We're going to be equipped with new tools, with new ways of looking at engaging students, and we're forever going to be changed in a very, very positive way. We just have to get over this year. So with that being said, I will leave it there.
Can I just ask one question about professional development?
Yes.
Yeah, I noted that you said 38 teachers, which is wonderful. I also note that's not the whole teacher population and that the slide is showing that this professional development is being done twice, offered twice, which is excellent. So I'm just wondering, have we thought through, because there could be a lot of reasons why teachers couldn't participate. How are we going to help our faculty who don't participate in this professional development?
Yeah.
get up to speed and because there are two components, right? What I hear you saying is we're not doing daily lessons anymore. We're doing weekly lessons, even when it's in person.
That's
And
right.
we're also talking about a whole population that is experiencing a national trauma on a lot of levels, economic, deaths, loss, I don't need to go into it, social justice. So how are we going to help our staff who doesn't participate?
So we do have
to
those
have an impact.
We do have those 2 weeks that we scheduled. We do have 10 of those 4-hour sessions that are scheduled over the summer. But I think more importantly, even with that, Beth, to your point, once again, there could be staff members who don't avail themselves of any of those summer opportunities, which brings me back to when Dr. O'Connell was showing us that timeline and really thinking about readjusting the beginning of the year and thinking about how we can front load some of those superintendent conference days. I think you just provided a rationale for why we would want to consider doing that, because we want to make sure, even for those teachers who are availing themselves of everything, there still will be work to be done. Never mind those teachers that really need to maybe take a look at some of this work through fresh eyes in September, which is why I think it's be something I would recommend the board consider.
To your
Great.
other, John, maybe you could also clarify, this isn't the first time our staff has been introduced to the Learning Arc concept. I know before we closed out of the year, and it's all a blur as to when, but I know you presented to all of the faculty this concept. So thinking started to surround this, Beth, to your question, even before we exited the school year. So I just wanted to add that piece. John has been, had been taking opportunities to share it with all staff prior to summer vacation. All right, so now we're coming around the end. My goodness gracious, I think did we start at 7 and now it's 5 after 10? And Beth, this goes back to the other piece. You want to know, like, where are we landed? What are we recommending? And whereas we might all have our own thoughts after having heard this, we still don't want to miss an opportunity again for our community. We've been leveraging this tool for thought exchange, some real positives to it, just to give people a chance. So for those who are viewing the discussion this evening, we welcome your thoughts on tonight's reentry discussion. Very similar in the same way that we did this for our reentry task force. After we presented, we gave them an opportunity to share. So we would like to do that to the greater public tonight that has been so great and shared time with us viewing our discussion tonight. So John, would you just give us a primer on this slide?
I'd be happy to. So there are a few different ways that you can join the thought exchange. If you take your camera and you point it at the QR code, it should take you to the same page that you would get if you go to tejoin.com and type in that 9-digit code, or if you click on the link when we post this PDF on our website, that will be an active link you could just click on. There will then be that prompting question: what are your thoughts on the reentry plans the district has presented this evening? There will be a text field where you will be able to enter a thought. If you'd like to go back in and enter more thoughts, that's also very encouraged. After you enter thoughts, what the software does is then takes you through and shows you the thoughts of other community members who have also answered that question, so that you could rate your response to how much you agree with other community members and their thoughts. That gives us the real potential to take a look at our community and their thinking, see what the shared thinking is, and once again, really respond and have it guide how we move into the future.
It's been a wonderful tool to use your word, John, guide our thinking. It's really deepened the conversations we've been able to have. So with that said, we're concluding my superintendent's report, which I think on record now is the longest one I have ever had.
I think it may be.
I think it might be. I think it might, or maybe add up all of my superintendent's reports and now fit into this one. So,
I'm going to go ahead and add a little more.
okay, go ahead, Brian.
Because it's important to us, and I think to a lot of people in the community. What about the music program, strings and band and clubs? And, I think there's guidance already on sports from maybe the state or something. But what about these other things? I mean, they're really important, but, it's questionable whether or not there's sort of safety there as well.
So
right?
I'm just going to start with one piece, and then I'm going to ask John to, join in. There are some real specific guidance in the documents about singing, instruments use, and the social distancing that is required with that. Because if you think about it, singing now, I can't maybe not have this mask, and now air, etc. So I think we read like 12 feet in terms of social distancing. So first thing I want to say is for some of those things with music and singing, chorus, band instruments, there's some direct guidance surrounding that. But specials are built in. John, if you'd like to just take a moment to say something about that, and then we'll loop to the extracurricular piece.
Yes. So when we have been talking about use of outdoor space, I think one of the best uses I could think of is when we're talking about our ensembles, because there is going to be the safest place with what we know to congregate and be able to socially distance. As we've been looking at how to utilize the time when students will be doing remote learning from home, a lot of the special areas, especially with music, there is an issue with latency of internet and being able to synchronize players from multiple locations online, which is a shame. But what we do know is that it is an appropriate setting for things like lessons. We do know that there is a lot of good practices since the pandemic has been happening of teachers being online with student musicians and being able to do those things where they are practicing passages, receiving formative feedback on how well they're playing. So that is something that definitely will be encouraged and then can continue as well.
So I'd want to continue to look at it from a health and safety perspective, Brian, because let's think about the instruments and the wind instruments, et cetera. So to John's point, maybe that would be a better time when that would be an at-home piece. So that's still in exploration. One of the key focus areas to your latter point, definitely athletics and extracurriculars. So a few things we have to consider here. First, you did mention the athletic piece. Yes, we have received guidance documents on athletics. So let me just set that aside and go directly to extracurriculars. We're still giving thought to how the buildings are used after the school day, because that goes back to the conversations with facilities and our protocols around cleaning, disinfecting, and getting the school building ready for the next day. So I want to put that out there. So we are still examining what extracurriculars, how they could look. Is that going to be a virtual piece? I'm not sure. Our key focus area from the task force is athletics and extracurricular, and we will be hearing from their work in our task force meetings. I'm not certain tomorrow or the next day or the next meeting, but most definitely we're still in discussions on what extracurricular, so meaning a club for community that might know what we mean by extracurricular. How could a club continue to exist even if we didn't physically if we're not on campus. So if you think about a split schedule and I'm running a club, what day do I run that club on? If it's a Croton day, I only have a certain group on campus. If it's a Harmon day, I have the other group on campus. And then from a facilities piece, we might not want anybody in the building after the school day. So we're still needing discussion surrounding extracurricular because clubs so enrich our educational program. So will they be virtual, or what are some good thinking around that? We're still in the planning phase of that, or planning discussions of that.
Right.
Dr. O'Connell, you also, I'm sure you're addressing pre-care and aftercare, because it's not, and that's not an extracurricular, but it's the same issue, right? Whether it can be provided with our constraints. So
yes, that is something we are actively having discussions. I will say in the New York State guidance, it's very clear that if it was a district program, we would have to be submitting plans specific to it. Our before and after care, scenarios that we have now, I shouldn't use the word scenarios, the program that we have now is not a district run program. So, but to your other point, yes, we're having discussions because what does that mean for the building before and after the school day? What does that mean for our, we spent a lot of time talking about, Croton Orange and Harmon Black cohorts, keeping kids within the same cohort. So now that's why we're continuing discussion about before and after care, because now you're mixing up some cohort, right? So an excellent question. Yes, we're having conversations. We haven't landed anywhere on that yet because we recognize the great service it has for the community and need it might, meet for the community, but we're having conversations about those other pieces.
Just to follow up on that, there's also a sort of social emotional aspect to having the whole student body split in two. So there may be opportunities for them to come together in some kind of extracurricular, depending upon if it's set up in a safe way. Because I know that being on the task force, I heard from certain students that this was distressing to them to be, split up.
So yeah, I love our kids on the task force. God, do you love them or what? But
absolutely.
I did after that meeting, you can understand, think about what we just went through with not being on campus and thinking about our graduating seniors, right? And all of the conversations we had to ensure that they had a special everything, that as much as we could make it such a special event, right? So for the community that's, tuning in, our seniors, our rising seniors, of course, said, how hard will it be for us to be in, let's say, an AK or an LZ? So today's Monday, yes. So I asked Mrs. Duback to meet with her, the group. I didn't have a chance yet to see the information from their meeting, but just to give them an opportunity to flesh it out. Do they have some ideas, et cetera? So I will say, as of my speaking right now, I haven't had a chance to see what Mrs. Duback has sent to me, but I did ask, based on the task force meeting, that she meet separately with them so they would have an opportunity to continue the dialogue with her.
And I just would like to make a request, is as we go forward with this information, as a board member, and I don't know if other people agree with me, I would love to hear a little bit more specifically about how our special needs groups, the ELL and our special ed students are sort of having their needs met, or how their communication is going, just so that we have an understanding of how their needs are being sort of handled through this whole, and what the communication is going to be like with their parent groups.
Excellent. Most definitely. It's a very important piece. And I think I'd like to, go back to the community forums. So, I think those are going to be key. And I really want to, tonight, just think about how much we went through and yet how much we still want more detail on, right? So I think the way in which we think through how we, chunk the information for the community forums, I think will also help in being able to drill down, but yet not overwhelm. That's my hope as we continue to plan those.
Speaking of the community, I just want to share that we do have our thought exchange live right now, and we have community on there right now. They're exchanging thoughts with 18 people on there who are actually on there starting to write down their thinking. Once again, I'm sharing it because everything on Thought Exchange is anonymous, but I thought maybe the board would be interested in seeing how the tool starts to generate connections and people commenting and starting to generate. You'll see what on top the most highly rated thoughts are coming out of the presentation that we are still having right now as we speak.
Wonderful. Is there a closing date on this thought exchange for the community?
Thank you for mentioning that. Yes, we are keeping this open throughout the day tomorrow. It will be closing basically midnight, between Tuesday and Wednesday. So tomorrow night at midnight.
So it is a fast exchange, as you know, we have, a real tight timeline. Remember, just to reiterate, we have to finalize our plans by July 31st, and districts across the board really are still working through, the information before them. So we're not landed yet. We're still getting feedback. I think we have some really good bones and structures in place, et cetera. So with that, I'd like to conclude the superintendent's report.
Can I make one request?
I am so trying to wrap up the superintendent.
I know you are. My
Are you
request is
sensing
actually,
my energy here? Go ahead, Iris.
it's really simple because you know me, I'm all about ending it, right? Ending meetings. Can we put the thought exchange up on the website for those of us that would like to go onto it later?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
That was an easy one.
Thank you. No other questions from anyone else?
Sarah,
All right.
you
Well,
up?
we will can you guys hear me?
Now I can. Go ahead. Did
Okay.
you have a question for me?
No, I had no other questions. If no one else had any other questions, that will finish out our superintendent's report for the night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Administration for that very deep look at the different scenarios and all the work that the task force has been doing and will continue to do. And this is very difficult. It's a complicated process. So thank you very much. Now we will move into the closing of the meeting. We will be heading into executive session and expect to adjourn immediately following executive session. So we will end here after we make this motion, our public viewing for the evening. Thank you to the community members who joined us tonight. And as John said, please log on to the thought exchange and let us know your thoughts. So with that, I will recommend an action that the Board of Education enters into executive session to discuss proposed, pending, or current litigation and the employment of a particular person or persons.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose? Abstain? Motion carries. All right, we'll see you all over in the executive session, and thank you again to the community. Have a nice night, and good night, Tracy.